You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hey folks, just before we start the show today, I want to do a little house cleaning here and thank all of the latest Patreon donors to the show. I really appreciate you spending your hard-earned cash and spending your hard-earned time listening to the show. Alistair Montgomery, Nicholas Kurnow, Stuart Rankin, David Bertrand, Winter Tyson, Jason Kaufman, thank you guys so much for donating to the show. I always appreciate it. It is just a wonderful thing that people care enough about the projection booth to give their hard-earned cash to this show, this venture. So thank you for helping me out. I really appreciate that. All right, with that, let's get on to the big show.
Christopher Media, let's make some noise.
He thought he was watching her, but she was watching him. He thought he was trespassing, but he was invited. He knew he had gone too far. He couldn't stop. He saw exactly what she wanted him to see. Brian De Palma, the modern master of suspense, invites you to witness a seduction, a mystery, a murder. Body Double. You can't believe everything you see.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me this week is Mr. Bill Ackerman.
Great to be back.
Also in the booth this week is Mr. Jim Vendiola.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me.
This week we're discussing Brian De Palma's 1984 film Body Double. The film stars Craig Wasson as Jake Scully, an actor in a low-budget vampire film. He experiences a terrifying bout of claustrophobia while trying to perform a scene. He leaves the set, which has been closed down for a week, and starts to pound the pavement looking for a gig in the interim. While making the rounds, he meets fellow actor Sam Bouchard, played by Greg Henry. Sam's going out of town and does a favor for his new pal by setting him up in a lavish house with an incredible view, a woman who performs a ritual of self-pleasure across the way. But of course, things aren't always what they seem. Now, we're going to be getting to spoilers big time in this episode, so if you haven't watched this movie before, you have been warned. So, Bill, when was the first time you saw Body Double, and what did you think?
I think the first time I saw it was probably in the early 90s. It would have been on VHS. I would have seen Dressed to Kill, and that would have made me curious to check out more Brian De Palma thrillers. And I think I expected something maybe in that ballpark, like a more explicit take on the classic Hitchcock thrillers. And I remember thinking it was a lot weirder and more over the top than I was expecting. Like, I had seen other stylish 80s thrillers like Blood Simple, Body Heat, Blue Velvet, maybe a few that didn't begin with B, but I was surprised how like 80s it was, like the music and fashion, like it didn't feel like it was designed to be as timeless as maybe some of the earlier De Palma thrillers like Obsession that felt a little bit more almost self-consciously classy. Like this felt like a different animal than what I was expecting. And I might have thought that that was something of a flaw at the time because I used to be a little bit more tough on elements that took me out of a movie. And this would have been when the 80s were only just having ended a few years ago. So I probably was a little bit taken aback by Frankie Goes to Hollywood showing up and whatnot. But over the years, maybe having seen all of De Palma's other films and just rewatching it a lot over the years, it's become one of my favorites easily of his.
How about you, Jim?
I was pretty late to this movie. Prior to seeing this in my mid-20s, I was a big fan of De Palma's 70s stuff, Sisters in particular, as well as Carrie, and Phantom of the Paradise I also liked a lot. So I don't think I had seen Dress to Kill. I've always been kind of a big Scarface hater, having grown up in Miami, Florida. I think Pacino's accent is just over the top to the point of being offensive, and for like almost 3 hours of a running time, I just kind of find that mostly insufferable.
Where'd you learn to speak the English, Tony?
In a school. And my father, he was from the United States.
When I saw this, probably towards the end of the aughts, I really did not know what to make of it. I had been gifted a VHS copy of it as a white elephant, and the person who gave it to me just thought it was completely silly, and so I just gave it a shot one night, and I tended to agree. I thought it was basically the most absurd film I had ever seen in my, fairly short but voluminous film viewing life, and I still kind of stand by that.
I saw this one on cable, probably mid to late 80s. This one came out in 84. I probably saw it around like 86, 87, somewhere around there. It was really the golden age of erotic thrillers. And I don't know where this fits into the whole pantheon of erotic thrillers, but seeing stuff on late night cable when you're a teenager, stuff like this, stuff like Ken Russell's Crimes of Passion, you could find more twisted sexuality on TV if you were looking for it, but this really scratched an itch that I had, and the over-the-topness and everything. And I'm seeing this movie before I'm seeing the movies that inspired it. I'm seeing this maybe around the same time I'm watching Rear Window, but I'm definitely seeing it before Vertigo. I'm seeing it before a lot of other Hitchcock things. So for me, this is the genuine article, and I don't really know that it's playing on other themes until much later, like watching Vertigo in college and saying, oh, this is just like Body Double. Backwards, but that's okay. But yeah, I absolutely love this film, and it is one that has stuck with me for years. And when people talk about De Palma, I know a lot of people go back to Dress to Kill. That was a huge movie for him. And then, yeah, Scarface right around the same time was also a very big movie for him. I didn't come to Dress to Kill until I was in college, and I was just like, okay, yeah, this doesn't really do it for me. Scarface never really did it for me. I mean, I've talked on the show before about movies like Blowout and Phantom of the Paradise. That to me is prime De Palma, and Body Double is right up there with those movies as far as style and having something to say, playing with the medium. And you can dismiss this as being just kind of a style exercise, but I think there's a lot more going on, which is one of the reasons why I chose it to be an episode, is because there is so much to uncover here, and it is such a fun kind of mashup of all of these Hitchcock things with a great Brian De Palma twist to it.
It's almost his most postmodern film in that sort of mashup pastiche sort of pre-Tarantino kind of way.
It feels like, in some ways, like it's a trolling of his critics and a trolling of the MPAA and a trolling of feminist protesters. Like it's definitely got a mischievous quality to it, but it's also like a great excuse to show off Los Angeles. Like outside of Obsession, all of his more Hitchcockian films prior to this were Philadelphia and New York stories, and this feels like a really good excuse to go to interesting locations, whether it be places like Tale of the Pup, like that hot dog stand, or like the Chemisphere House, or the Rodeo Collection. Like it's a film that's excited to express a story through locations. Like we're going to be talking about theme and character in the film, but with De Palma, I think a lot of the time, he's conceiving in terms of strong imagery and set pieces more than strong characters or dialogue. And so it feels like a film that's very much in love with all of the places that it's going to take you, like visually, in terms of, where things are set.
And just so people know, we are going to be talking a lot about Rear Window, maybe a little bit of Dial M for Murder, definitely Vertigo. So if you aren't familiar with those movies, definitely check those out, maybe even before you listen to this episode, because we're going to be name-checking those like crazy, even when it comes to the very beginning of the film, because in Vertigo, you get the opening where you see why Jimmy Stewart has vertigo, and when it comes to the opening of Body Double, we start with Jake having this moment of claustrophobia, and that is his ailment, much like Jimmy Stewart had vertigo in Vertigo, but claustrophobia in this movie. And we kind of find out why he has it a little bit later on, but we don't actually see it. It's not like a moment that we get. We don't have Craig Wasson stuck in a space like we have Jimmy Stewart dangling from the roof at the beginning of Vertigo, and we never really see the rescue or anything. We get him in an enclosed space in this coffin. It's got a cutaway to the side of it, so it's not even like it's completely enclosed in. I guess it's because the camera's so close to him that he feels like he's cut out, but we don't really get anything that's going on inside of Jake's brain. So it's kind of a mystery to us what's happening here, and we don't necessarily get that solved for us as we go along.
Yeah, it's definitely something that seems a lot less consistent and more shoehorned into the narrative than Stewart's Vertigo. Jumping ahead just a little bit, like I feel like there's the scene where he's in that long corridor, which doesn't feel claustrophobic at all compared to the other binds he finds himself in that sort of trigger that.
It's not necessarily tacked on, but we don't get it as much. And I was surprised reading the screenplay. Some of the moments that happen inside of this movie, we don't actually get in the screenplay. Like him in to me, a very familiar situation. I hate crowds and I hate being kind of hemmed in by people. So him in that elevator, he doesn't have a reaction necessarily in the script, but he does have it in the movie. And that's one of those moments where we're like, oh yeah, he's got claustrophobia. And it's good that they keep reminding us of that, because otherwise, honestly, we would forget, because it's just not that much to it. It's not like it really adds those many things. It's more, I think that his more, how should I say, debilitating ailment is his voyeurism. And that's what the Greg Henry character ultimately plays upon. And he just kind of uses the claustrophobia as kind of a little bit of gravy on that situation.
When we talk about the Wasson character, I think it's meant to be, like an emasculated character. Like that's what the Greg Henry, what he's picking up on is not just, him explain the claustrophobia in that actor's workshop, but, admitting to, his girlfriend, cheating on him, and maybe even picking up a little bit on the drinking problem that is really kind of disregarded at a certain point in the narrative. It's only kind of hinted at the beginning. Just he's the weakest, most vulnerable person for the job that he needs an actor for. There was more of them together in the original script, of them auditioning together, and Wasson's character being a weaker actor as well. Him using that to bond. That we still get that quality in the final film, though, but it's done in a different way, as far as identifying how to manipulate the character.
I think one of the reasons why this movie stands out so much for me is that I love movies about making movies, and I love movies that play with the conventions of movies, and this movie is right there. In this movie, even the title card is over a backdrop, and then the backdrop eventually moves, and we learn that it is a backdrop, that we're not looking out into this vista. And I like that even the credits are playing with this idea of doubles, which, if anybody's ever listened to this show before, they know how much I love talking about doubling, by having the two different fonts, that kind of more like it's more like a Rocky Horror type of font, and then just a standard serif font, in the way that we go from one to the other, and it kind of wipes away from one font to the other. So we're already playing with those things. And then to your point, Bill, as far as this emasculation of Craig Wasson's character, his character as a vampire is not the most butch vampire that I've ever seen. In fact, looking at him and then looking at Holly Body, the Melanie Griffith character later on in the film, they almost have the same hairstyle. And then he's got more eye makeup and makeup in general than I see any woman in this film wearing.
Yeah, I wonder if that doubling was intentional. I have to assume that maybe it was. I was always thinking of The Lost Boys the first time I saw this, but this would have been before that, as far as that kind of glam goth vampire of the 80s.
And I mentioned before that one of my favorite De Palmas is Blowout, and that, again, plays with movies and behind the scenes and movie making. And the beginning of that movie starts off like we are watching another film, and it's this slasher film, and this one we start with a vampire film, and then we eventually learn that it's not a real movie in both Blowout and then as well as this, that we're not watching a film, we are watching someone shooting a film. And it's nice that these are both very low budget movies. In fact, it seems like Jack Terry from Blowout could have been working on this movie if it was being shot in Philadelphia, but instead it's in LA, and we have Dennis Franz coming back again, who was also in Blowout and is kind of a regular actor for De Palma, playing the director here, very much a direct comment on De Palma, even wearing the same jacket and everything that De Palma likes to wear. I really appreciate that they use the low budgetness also as kind of a little bit of a punchline.
Both Blowout and Body Double, it's drawing a distinction between the films like the low budget schlock that people work on in those environments, but then the film that you're watching is a much, the implication is that this is like a real story. This isn't like the cheap stuff that our heroes are working on. It's a little bit, I don't want to say snobby. Certainly Blowout seems to be a little bit like judgmental in a funny way about slasher conventions, and this is certainly not any more flattering about what Vampire's Kiss is going to wind up being. But I always wonder how much of Dennis Franz's behavior is modeled on De Palma. Obviously the look is, but I wonder how much of his actorly business is based on things he's observed acting for De Palma.
Well, according to some of those documentaries on the indicator disc, it sounds like he was just like, yeah, I'll be in this if I can be you. And I do love that this movie is called Vampire's Kiss, which we'll see again in a few years with Nick Cage in it. Another fantastic film. I have to say that is one of my favorite Nick Cage performances.
How could somebody misfile something? What could be easier? It's all alphabetical. You just put it in the right file, according to alphabetical order. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z! Huh?
Yeah, it's maybe the second most absurd film I've seen, second to Body Double.
If we're talking about things that change from the script that we've read to the final film, a lot of times the ideas are replaced by more visually interesting variations. And one of the things in this scene that we're talking about now, it's the line like, "We've lost the sun." And in the script, it's like indicated like he doesn't, maybe like they're losing the light. But in the film, it's a fake sun that goes up in flames. Like there's a fire that shuts down the shoot. But I love the line like, "We've lost the sun" anyway, because it's, we're losing the light would be standard movie set terminology, but here it's like a fake sun that's just caught on fire, and that's why they have to close down.
Well, they make it better in the movie that they give it a little bit more time. It's this whole thing of, we're going to shut down for a week because we had a fire on the set. And then that motivates Wasson to go out because he's on a break. And then eventually he finds out that he's been fired from the film. And I love that it's his own agent who tells him that he's been fired. And the agent also made the commission off the guy who he then got hired onto that role. There's that little bit of a break, and it's not just the next day kind of thing, because it almost would have been too much to have him lose his job, go home, find his girl sleeping with somebody else, and, just be 1-2 punch kind of a thing. Whereas this is a little bit better that they give him a little bit more time and then pull the rug out from under him as far as, oh yeah, and you've been fired from this film too. I love that Barbara Crampton is his wife, and or his girlfriend, I think it is. The whole reveal of her and the way that we set up this kind of the tracking shots. I guess it's not really a tracking shot. It looks like it's a steady cam. It's a steady cam POV of him going through the hallways and then cutting back to him and then him opening up the door and seeing her on top of this guy who we never see the guy at all. And that look, the look on her face is probably one of the most interesting things in this movie for me, because you can read that look so many different ways. And I'm curious how you guys took that look on her face.
I took it as just disappointment. And I was wondering if this, maybe even a little bit irritated too. In the script, she has lines and it's kind of like a honey wait kind of moment. But in the final film, it is played more ambiguously. You're right. And I was wondering if this moment inspired a similar one, where William H. Macy walks in on his wife on top of a guy in Boogie Nights, which is another, of course, LA porn set, film. But, yeah, I always saw it that she was just irritated to be, and maybe a little bit sorry for him too.
Yeah, no, I definitely think about that scene with Nina Hartley in Boogie Nights when I see it now, especially because I had seen Boogie Nights prior to seeing this. In regards to the look on her face, I do feel like it's this sort of this initial disappointment followed by this, well, you're kind of complicit in this too for being who you are, which is what we've observed and what we will observe is kind of a loser. I mean, even the long steady cam lead up to him discovering her in bed is just this kind of an extension of that, because he thinks I think he's the only one that doesn't realize what's going on. Like, we as the viewer, I think, know right away. The dog knows. He looks at the dog. He shushes the dog. But then, like, ultimately the joke's on him. And it seems like it's almost his fault for that.
It's funny you mentioned losers, and I don't know if you noticed his tattoo in Vampire's Kiss says "Born to Lose," and I don't know if that's meant to be a clue as to what's going to happen to him. I love the oral joke in this scene where The House is Burning by Viva Beat is playing in the background, and it ends the scene on the uh-oh line, like, uh-oh, you walked in on somebody. And later the song, is something he's watching again, and it comments on the action again, because the next line is, the house is burning, but there's no one home. Like, it's reminding him of that moment that he's had in his former home, which is just a neat little musical joke.
I like that we get a little bit of a clue as to what kind of person Jake Scully is too. When he gets to his house, he looks in to his own house through his window, and that's the first instance that I think we get of him peeping. So it's nice that even with his own house, he's looking in his own window, which is kind of a weird little moment for him to have. And I should have mentioned, when he is leaving the Vampire's Kiss set, we get the first of many really bad looking process shots. And I think it's bad on purpose. It kind of reminds me of those bad process shots from something like Marnie, where it's him just driving and the background looks so completely fake and the sun on him looks so completely like just a spotlight on stage. But with something like this, I think it is really done on purpose and showing us the artifice of film, even though this isn't something quote unquote low budget like Vampire's Kiss, that we're still going to be playing with this kind of different filmmaking tricks and stuff. And we know right from the get-go that there are these things that are going to be employed.
I think that it's definitely meant to evoke the kind of process shots that Hitchcock would use. I mean, I agree with you. It reminded me of Marnie also. One last thing about the Barbara Crampton scene. In the script, he's hearing her moans, and he thinks that maybe something has happened, like that maybe she's been injured, because he's so unfamiliar with her moans of pleasure that he mistakes it for an injury, like she's been robbed or something, which is ironic because, what comes later. But the fact that it's changed to laughter changes the meaning of that scene, but it would have been even more damning of his abilities as a lover for him not to recognize the sound of his own girlfriend's moans.
To further add to that, I forgot to mention that one of the things that sticks out to me prior to him going home is he goes and drives to this hot dog stand and picks up these hot dogs for him and his girlfriend. And there are these two actors. There's a guy feeding a woman a hot dog at this hot dog stand, and not to mention just the way they shoot the facade of this hot dog stand. It's literally this sausage stuck in between these like two round buns, which is such a funny De Palma trademark sleazy sort of foreshadowing that I've come to enjoy in his stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if it's more like an anal thing, or I should put it in this parlance, I don't know if it's more Greek or more Russian. It almost looks like a penis between two breasts, the way that it's formed there.
Yeah, with some like mustard running down the middle, which is so vivid.
At first, I had to look it up because I was mistaking this hot dog stand for the same one that's in Mulholland Drive, which I thought would have been a nice touch. But that one, I think, is Pink's, and this one is Tail of the Pup. And I looked on Yelp, and it looks like Tail of the Pup is no longer in business. So if you're going to go out to LA and do a body double site tour, do not expect to eat lunch at Tail of the Pup.
I think that it's in storage, last I heard. But yeah, it's you can also see it in the George Benson video for Give Me the Night.
Nice.
I think Pamela Anderson works there in the pilot episode of VIP. Like, it's in a few things. It was like a famous landmark for, I think it used to be in business like in the late 40s. So I think De Palma would have known it was a landmark of the period. But yeah, no, it's a hilarious visual joke as well. Perfect for him.
Well, yeah, and it's another bit of that love letter to LA that this movie is. And it's another great place to use as a visual clue as to where you're at in the city. You know, I just was talking recently about Pulp Fiction, and that movie really depends on locations and knowing where you're at in Los Angeles. This one, it plays with that, this whole idea of the building that we're going to talk in a little bit, where Jake ends up, looks out at a completely different area of Los Angeles, and De Palma kind of marries these two very disparate places together. But it's nice that it's just this kind of weird make-believe version of a Los Angeles, which kind of plays again into the way that movies are made. And I did want to say, I know that Vertigo is really, you know, that is a San Francisco movie, but the place that Jake ends up spending the night, the bartender, he goes and talks to his bartender. That place so reminds me of the place where Jimmy Stewart sees Madeleine go and sees her car and everything. I was very surprised that it wasn't the same place, but I swear that it looks like it was designed by the same designer.
It does feel like they scouted, or at least, yeah, that was intentional to some degree, because I had the same reaction.
Yeah, I looked it up after I saw that you had said that in the notes before we recorded it. It's actually the Hollywood Tower where I think Humphrey Bogart used to live there.
And I don't know what that hotel is in San Francisco, or apartment buildings where Madeleine stays in Vertigo, but yeah, now I want to go back and do a side-by-side. I'm probably absolutely wrong, and they don't look anything like each other, but I was just reminded of the one to the other. And right around this time, when Jake goes out and is looking for new work, this is also where we're introduced to this Sam Bouchard character, who's played by Greg Henry, and he is ever present at each one of these interviews that Jake goes on. We see Sam, and I love the way that his ears perk up at different points. Like when he hears that Jake needs a place to stay, he turns around and immediately ingratiates himself into this conversation. And there are other moments where he will just be there and put himself into the conversation. And I really appreciate the role that Greg Henry plays in this. And this is an interesting role for this guy, because he's playing essentially three different characters in this one particular film. So there are going to be times where we're talking about this and we'll say, like, you know, the Ravel character, the Indian character, the Bouchard character, but they're all played by Greg Henry. And I love that he can manipulate Jake so well that he is right there. And it seems like he's kind of trying out other actors in the meantime, in the background, like when he's talking to these other people. It feels like he is talking to them, maybe feeling them out, but then it seems like Jake is custom fit to be this perfect patsy.
Yeah, it's almost like this is an unintentional doubling of De Palma's, in that Greg Henry is a better actor as Sam Bouchard, but I'd also argue that he's a better actor in this movie than Craig Wasson.
Craig Wasson is an interesting actor. He has such a hangdog look to him, and he is he really is perfect for this role as this kind of sad sack guy who, we've mentioned before, he's very ineffectual. He's feminized at times. He's just, he is not a very good actor. He ends up freaking out, in this acting class. I mean, there's just a lot of moments where you're just like, wow, this guy really doesn't, work very well. But I think Craig Wasson was the perfect choice for him.
Yeah, he's supposed to be a loser. He's supposed to be, like a weak character. And I think that, it's great casting. I mean, it's hard to really judge it because, maybe, he's not as, like if someone like Travolta was casting that like another movie star that he'd worked before, we'd be sensing that there's a character choice that he's making. But because Craig Wasson never really had a lot of parts after this. I mean, he did work for a little bit while longer. I think he's no longer acting, but we don't have that same maybe familiarity with him as some of the other leads that De Palma would have worked with. I mean, I think prior to this, Wasson would have best been known for Ghost Story or For Friends, the Arthur Penn movie, like not big movies. And like this was really his last shot at a major breakthrough, and he didn't really achieve it. So, but that works for the character, knowing that he's going to fail at becoming a big movie star makes his story as a struggling actor that much more kind of moving, I think.
I've seen him in Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors as well. And it's almost, sort of a identical blank canvas kind of performance, I'd say.
Yeah, that one has a body double gag, doesn't it? Because he gets thrown in a grave at one point.
Oh, I did not make that connection.
The interview with him on the Indicator Blu-ray was hilarious because it basically is saying what you guys were just saying. Like, the interviewer asks him, like, didn't you expect to become more popular from For Friends or Ghost Story or any of these others? And he's just like, yeah, I thought that would be the big break, but that wasn't it. And no, this other one wasn't it. And it's just like, yep, and Body Double isn't going to be it either. And I don't think it's his fault in any of these cases. He does a great job, but he just, I don't know, something about him just isn't that compelling to me.
At the same time, Body Double has lived on to the degree that it's had multiple re-releases. I mean, we're talking about it. It's got a big cult following to this day. Like, he does have at least one film that stays in the conversation, maybe more so than really anything else he's been in other than maybe Dream Warriors. I mean, there's maybe people continue to joke that he looks like Bill Maher, and like that might be, the punchline, the Body Double guy looks like Bill Maher, but he still got one film that is still in the conversation, which is more than a lot of actors in this film.
I do like that in the script, there's a little bit more to Sam Bouchard in that he has a cast on his hand. And that to me, it's always one of these things where if somebody has their hand broken or their arm broken, it always seems to kind of indicate a little bit of and I know that this is a weird thing to say, but, watching enough Star Wars films over the years, when you see someone get their hand cut off or their hand disabled, it's usually some sort of a castration metaphor. So him having his hand in a cast is a little bit like, I'm more on your level, Jake, because I'm also disabled. But it's yet another bit of a layer for him to say, like, this is the Sam Bouchard character. He has this bit of set dressing, and then when he is the Ravel character, he's got the hat, and then when he's the Indian character, he's got the hat and the glasses and this and that and the other thing and the whole makeup thing going on. They eliminated that, but it's really okay. But it also kind of helped when it came to the introduction, and I can't remember who pointed it out, but in the script, there's a bit of a thing where when he goes to shake Jake's hand, he gets black on Jake's hand because he had been performing Othello. So it's like, okay, we're already getting that idea that he can put on these other roles and can put himself into completely other races.
In the film, they're trying out for a traveling Shakespeare company, but in the script, it's specifically Othello, and they're both trying out for the role of Othello, I guess. Yeah, that whole notion of Sam Bouchard committing to a blackface interpretation of the role for the tryout is such an odd, strange choice. I don't know how the film would have played if that had been retained, but it does foreshadow his willingness to play non-white characters, which I guess would be the part of the film that has maybe aged the weirdest, his portrayal of the quote unquote, the Indian. I think that's maybe the part that people find the most difficult to talk about now.
It was the 80s. We were all dressing up like Indians. I won a contest at a party.
Just don't post a picture of that, and I think you'll be all right.
I do love that shot of Jake when he's at the one, I guess it's an audition, and it's completely wordless, and he's sitting there at the end of a table with this nervous look on his face, and then they cut to what he's looking at, and it's just this room of people all staring at him. I mean, I think De Palma does a pretty good job of really showing the kind of horrible things that actors have to go through, and just the idea of all the pressures that are on Jake at this point.
While he's waiting for it, I never noticed until this week when rewatching it that there's another actor who looks a lot like Jeff Daniels, more so than Bill Maher, waiting right next to him wearing an identical outfit. So it's another double, but it's someone that looks just like a better looking version of him in the same outfit. Trying out for the part, like it's another, cruel reality of being a struggling actor, is there's always going to be someone that's just like a better version of you waiting to take that role.
And we should talk about his clothes. His clothes are so distinct. He's almost always wearing like a light colored shirt with that brown, almost looks like it's a professor type of blazer that he's got going on, the jeans, the sneakers. And he wears that through so much of this movie. It's almost, it's very distinctive. There are moments where he ends up changing his wardrobe to great effect because we see him in this one type of outfit so much through the majority of this, that when he changes into the sweater and the glasses, when he's the nerdy character we'll talk about, and then when he slicks back his hair and puts on more of the leather jacket, that changes his appearance greatly too, more so than you would think that it might. But having seen him constantly in his costume, it really does make an effective switch once he moves out of it.
For me, I sort of get so sick of his normal outfit that by the time he plays this douchebag porn producer, I'm almost grateful and I hate myself for it, that I prefer this look to, the look we've been stuck with for, an hour or so.
And we've made mention of this scene with the acting coach where we get this revelation of why Jake has claustrophobia, and it's this whole idea of him playing this game with his two older brothers called Sardine, where he's squished in behind a refrigerator. And apparently that came right out of De Palma. That was his thing, that he played that, and he's got the two older brothers that he always kind of looked up to, but also didn't necessarily like all that much. So that is interesting, that Jake is such a one-to-one relationship with our director, and especially, we know, having talked about home movies before on the show and stuff, that he had been a spy. He would spy on his dad and learned about his dad's affair and all this kind of stuff. So the whole idea of voyeurism really plays into that too. And I mean, what is a filmmaker really but like the ultimate voyeur, setting up all of these things for him to look at, and then for us, the audience, to then also be voyeurs looking at as well. But it's neat that we know now that De Palma was in that situation. I don't think he had claustrophobia because of it, but that he could give that backstory to Jake Scully was kind of a nice touch.
Yeah, the voyeurism thing, crops up in Greetings, Hi Mom, Sisters, Dress to Kill. So many of the De Palma films deal with that theme. That whole Sardine acting exercise sequence isn't in the script that we read either. That's definitely a case where he brought a personal story, and you don't think of him as a personal filmmaker in that way, like as far as like bringing up a lot of his own autobiographical elements. So it's a nice surprise to see that he's bringing in his own life into something so stylized.
I think it's interesting, too, for a movie that is so quintessentially De Palma in terms of the voyeurism and all the Hitchcockian tropes and his formalist devices, that we're completely missing a split screen in this movie, like not one split screen.
Was there a diopter shot in this? It feels like there might have been.
I think there are a few diopters, but no legitimate split screen.
I wondered how much the massaging of the shoulders and the whole director as therapist kind of thing, the you must act, the tough love kind of direction, like how much of that is meant to be parodying directors or not. I was thinking about like how so much of this probably is his own intending to comment on direction and performance in a postmodern way? Like how much of that is his own process or how much of that is satirizing how directors work with actors?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can look at Vertigo directly as being a movie about directing and changing a woman's appearance in order to fit the role and all those kind of things. And that whole thing comes up again and again in this movie as well. I mean, it takes me a while sometimes to realize that when we see Gloria Revelle, quote unquote, across the way, that is not Gloria Revelle, that is Holly Body, and the whole idea of how much of Holly do we see before we actually ever hear her speak, and how much of her was manipulated to be that role. And I love that whole idea again of the doubling of these women, and that we spend so much of the movie, the first part of the movie with Gloria Revelle and the second half of the movie with Holly Body. And it kind of reminds me of that whole Madeline Judy split that we have in Vertigo. And with that one, it's interesting because we have Judy turning to the camera and showing us through her flashback what's going on, but we never really get that identification with Holly Body or with Gloria Revelle in this movie. They're very much just two ciphers.
Yeah, I was thinking about how Helen Shaver did all the voice work for Deborah Shelton, and then I just kind of got lost in that thought.
I wondered if that was her voice or somebody else's voice. When she speaks to him outside of the tunnel, I was like, that doesn't seem like that's her voice.
Yeah, and that's another form of this sort of metafictional repurposing of the performers, right? Specifically the female ones, because that isn't Deborah Shelton's voice. It's Helen Shaver.
And speaking of voices, rather than it being this whole idea of the acting coach as therapist thing that we were talking about, and which again kind of reminds me of like Marnie with her childhood baggage and her having to work through this, and her secret's a little bit more terrible than being caught behind a refrigerator. But that rather than that scene, we have a scene of Sam and Jake on the same audition, both doing cartoon voices, and Sam is doing the very virile lion, and we've got Jake doing this hippo character, and apparently he keeps using the wrong voice for the hippo, but the director of the cartoon won't tell him what kind of voice to use. And it gets very, very frustrating. He's like, do you want me to talk higher, talk lower, talk slower, talk funnier, talk this way, talk that way? And the director's just like, no, I want you to do it this way. And he never says what this way is. Like, I want you to do it better. And Sam nails it right off the bat, but Jake has to do his lines 2 and 3 times before he basically finally loses it. And that is the moment where Sam really realizes this is the guy. And it's very much like in that acting coach scene that we were talking about, that nice push in on Sam when that is happening. And we just see those gears going in Greg Henry's brain to say, this is my guy. This is the guy I'm going to set up. And I don't know necessarily how he knows that Jake is a peeper, but he manages to set up the perfect thing to get Jake's attention. I guess more than Jake being a peeper, it's more just playing upon maleness and the whole idea of seeing a naked lady. And I don't want to put words in your guys' mouth, but I guess most guys would be interested if there was a really attractive lady across the way doing a striptease every night, 8 o'clock sharp or whenever the show goes on, and having that as a something that's a bonus to this apartment that he sets him up in.
Not only is it self-reflexive, right, because this is clearly one of De Palma's predilections, and it's one of Hitchcock's, but then he also implicates the audience for watching through the same telescope. And I think that's the reason that that scene goes on so long, is so you can at first be titillated, but then also start to feel really skeezy about it.
That's the first time that he shows Gloria to Jake through the telescope. I mean, there's a similar scene in Hi Mom where De Niro shows the Alan Garfield character a woman through a window, trying to interest him in a voyeuristic kind of film art project in that story. So it's a recurring, sequence too. I mean, it resonates with an earlier De Palma movie.
What I did was I computed a time on my watch, the 26 and a half minutes that it would take me to seduce her.
26 and a half?
Yeah, 26 and a half minutes, and I set the camera onto the clock radio, and I had this red light bulb.
Red light bulb?
On and off, and the camera was on.
Was
yeah, and the camera was on, and I could see it from her apartment. So as you'll see now, see, this is the preliminary stuff, like I'm getting her. Yeah.
She a pro?
And well, I think she is, as a matter of fact, but she's really great. And wait, see, what happens now is, see, we go down for a few minutes. You'll see right here.
That's good. You build up the
Watch. We're going to come up, and I rip her clothes off. It's fantastic. Great stuff. Should be up any second now. Just take a second.
Going back to the audition scene, the cartoon audition. I mean, it achieves the same thing that the Actors Workshop does, as far as Sam defending Jake against a director of some kind, or someone critiquing him. Like he takes the opportunity to bond with him by, in the cartoon audition, he throws the audition that he would have gotten the job, but he sacrifices it to entice Jake to become friends with him. But in that bar scene, it's clear that even though they're kind of bonding, he's still interviewing him. He's still trying to get him to check out women in the bar. He's trying to get him to drink more. He's feeling him out. So it's still part of that kind of interrogation that he's doing before offering him the apartment.
Right. And speaking of that bar scene, I think this is something that's subtle, but it stood out to me a lot. Is it sort of speaks to the incompetence that sort of runs through this Jake character on so many levels, is him sort of lamenting his newly broken off relationship. And he says, I keep picturing it. I see her laying there, which is just so weird because we specifically saw her on top. I don't know. I think that's maybe reading into it a little too much, but it just seems like something that Jake would say. So obviously say in terms of like not being able to remember and maybe not understand that he's being manipulated to the degree he's manipulated.
We didn't comment on the earlier bar scene, but the one that establishes his drinking problem. And it's funny because when the bartender tries to comfort him about the breakup, he kind of snarls at him like, just keep the glass fucking filled or whatever he says. But he quickly backs down the minute that he can see that a more macho persona offends or hurts another person. Like he's too gentle to play that character that he's trying out in that moment. He just goes back into self-pity like a second later. So it's clear that he's too broken and weak to even, engage as a surly drunk.
So there's this whole idea that Sam is leaving town. He's going to go up to Seattle. Is that right? To be in a repertory company?
A production of Private Lives, which I guess is an ironic choice for the Noel Coward play.
And so he wants Jake to stay at this place, and we mentioned before it's the Chemisphere building, which is a really interesting looking place. And reading that book called Double de Palma, thank you so much, Bill, for turning me on to that book. They talk a lot in there that it was specifically chosen because it is such a phallic looking building, and that the building that Gloria lives in, that her house is much more feminine. It's got all these curves to it and stuff. So I was like, okay, at least they're even recognizing that in the way that they're choosing these things. And again, I love that really cheesy process shot of Jake and Sam up inside of the up inside of the Chemisphere, the way that we see them up there. And I think after a while, they just built models of everything just so that they could control all of this stuff and they probably just rear projected a tiny little thing inside of a Chemisphere model that they had. It's a crazy bachelor pad with a rotating bed and a view of this woman across the way. Sam's going out of town to be in Private Lives, going up to Seattle. And this is really because we've gotten introductions to the score before, but this is where we get the theme of the film, and it's this Pino Donaggio score and this theme to the Gloria Revelle character that we're going to hear throughout this film, and it is just beautiful, ethereal, this woman's voice over top of it, and that is what we associate with Gloria, and then eventually we'll start to associate it with Holly. And it's nice that they kind of bring that back, that it's this motion, this whole ritual that she has of putting on these jewels and dancing around and then doing this masturbation thing. And I love that Sam questions him right off the bat, did you see her face? And it's like, no, I didn't see her face. He's looking at everything but the face. And of course, Sam covers it up with like, oh, she is gorgeous. But yeah, he knows that Jake is just interested in the body and watching the body. And it's a nice way to kind of ensure that, okay, you're just looking at what I want you to look at. I have set this up. I am the director of this scene, and you have just been the perfect audience member for me, Jake.
This is my favorite of the scores that he's composed for De Palma, and he's done most of the De Palma films since Bernard Herrmann passed away, like starting with Carrie, I think. This one, it's interesting because it has those Herrmann-esque kind of swelling dramatic cues, but it also has this telescope theme kind of echoes like the Tangerine Dream, Risky Business kind of scoring.
Oh, yeah.
As well as the Giorgio Moroder, kind of American Gigolo, like that kind of ethereal techno pop kind of sound of the early 80s, which really, I think, works perfectly, as a recurring motif, for Gloria in the film. As far as the scene where Sam shows him Gloria through the telescope, it also, this time watching it again, it reminded me of the scene in Videodrome where, the cameraman gets James Woods interested in the Videodrome show by showing him the sexual imagery. He's not really watching it himself, but this is the hook to get him obsessive and, manipulate him through the sexual imagery.
And it's also a way to get Jake then to watch Act 2. That's the whole thing. Every single time he does this, he wants him to watch the second act. In the first act is Holly Body doing her thing. Apparently she leaves at some point, and then the real Gloria Revelle comes in, and then Sam puts on another show, but this time he's actually an actor in the show by being her husband and beating her up, taking her jewels or taking her money and then leaving. So now we've set this whole idea up. And the next time he is another actor where he is now the Indian character. And I know I keep saying Indian character and I should be saying Native American character, but that's what they call him in this movie. So it's a little bit easier for me to just say that. So I apologize. I tend to say Native American, but yeah, so he's again acting in this, but this time he's in Act 1 in the second night where he is now watching that. And I like that he's doing this work on a satellite dish at night, but he's got this acetylene torch, so the sparks from that are what draws Jake's eyes over to him. It's kind of like a lighting effect where it's like, no, I'm going to misdirect you from Holly Body. Come over here and look at me looking at Holly Body. So we kind of have this double voyeurism thing going on. And it's really nice that he is that manipulative. So again, Jake, our sad sack character, is doing exactly everything that Sam Bouchard, now also known as, what is it? He has two different names because in the script he's one Revelle and in the movie he's another Revelle. Is it Alexander Revelle in the movie, I think?
Yeah, I think so.
So that Alexander Revelle, and then now that the Indian want him to look at. So he's being manipulated by quote unquote 3 people at this point. And it is an interesting thing that he manages somehow. Now, this seems almost a little bit of a stretch and almost kind of lending a little bit to possible magic in this movie that Sam manages to get a perfect thing happening the next day where there's Mexican guys who are cleaning up some stuff on the road, and that's where Gloria comes down from her house. Jake is there on the road, and then Jake sees the Indian, farther up the road, and that begins, to me, one of the best set pieces that De Palma does, and that is this whole scene at this Galleria Mall, and this is just breathtaking to me, and I absolutely love this whole sequence that starts on that second day and goes all the way up to the end of the day.
Yeah, it feels like an extension of the kind of thing he's doing in the museum scene in the first act of Dress to Kill, like that kind of silent stalking, but just on a grander scale. It is the centerpiece of the whole film. I mean, it might not be as commented on as like the drill murder and the Frankie Goes to Hollywood and other things that are more flamboyant, but it is it's a great example of what De Palma does best. And
again, this is right out of Vertigo when Scotty Ferguson is tracking down Madeline and watching her and going around and around, and basically that whole spiral pattern that we keep seeing in Vertigo. And here he's following her through different parts of Los Angeles to the Galleria, and we get so many echoes of that, to the point where we've got her in a dressing room, and the slit of the curtain of the dressing room is very much like the door that Scotty's looking through as he looks through the back of the one store at her buying the dress. And we'll get that same idea later on with the introduction proper of the Holly Body character, very much similar as far as the doorway and the reflection and all this kind of stuff. And we get a nice reflection in here when she's going into this dressing room, and we've got this actress who is playing the shop girl, and I'm going to screw up her name, Slavica Jovan, mostly familiar to me as being Gozer the Gozarian from Ghostbusters. I don't know why I never realized that woman was in any other movies, but then when I put two and two together, it's like, oh my God, I chose the form of the Destructor.
Yeah, 1984 was a good year for her.
Definitely.
That scene where Gloria's trying on the dress, it reminded me this time of this scene because she's wearing the dark glasses inside. It reminds me of the scene at the head of Sisters, the Peeping Tom's game show where Margot Kidder plays the blind girl changing, unaware of a potential voyeur. Like, it's the same kind of moment. And Jake gets busted multiple times spying on her in this scene. It's like the voyeur's nightmare because the security guy stops him, Gozer the Gozerian stops him. Even the Indian is watching him from across the way. Like, everyone sees his attempt at, he's doing a very bad job at tailing her, and a very bad job of, peeping on her subtly.
Yeah, he's kind of the worst.
He's not good at anything.
I always love the moment that starts off this sequence when the Indian goes running by. And it's so fast that there's a lot of times where he runs by and then it's just like, wait, was that the Indian that just ran by us? And it's a really nice touch. And this whole idea, I'm surprised that De Palma didn't do more things as a single take. This kind of reminds me of Snake Eyes, with the way that we're kind of going through all of those different scenarios at the beginning of Snake Eyes as one. It's not really a continuous take because we know there's digital edits by this time, but it looks like a single take. But in here we get some really long takes. Again, we get the use of the Steadicam. I love some of the wider shots where we are following Jake and then we can see both Gloria and the Indian at the same time on the same planes in this mall and everything. Just, I love the way that this is shot. And again, so many POV shots from Jake, so many, it looks like some POV shots from Gloria, which is interesting because we don't get a lot of Gloria. She's really, like I said, she's a cipher. We don't understand her very much at all. And it's a little bit of a surprise when we find out that she is calling another man, this guy, I think his name is Philip, who we never end up seeing or meeting at all in this film. So I guess she and this other guy are having an affair, but yeah, we never meet him at all. So he's just this kind of mystery figure that's out there. I guess maybe he's a red herring, right? Maybe we could think that he was behind some of this stuff that's going on, but I never think about Philip at all. He just is, he's supposed to meet her at a hotel. She's buying the new underwear for him, but then we never see this guy whatsoever.
Yeah, I never even think of him either. And I want to ask you this because do you think that Sam Bouchard is do you think it's meant to be a surprise that he's a villain? Because we've had so many hints from the beginning of his introduction to not trust him. That, like, you can see it on his face that he's planning something, when we're first, in that acting class. Do you think that is meant to be suspenseful, whether or not he's in on some conspiracy?
That's a really good question. I mean, it has been so long ago that I watched this the first time that I can't even put myself back in those shoes as far as, did I know that he was a bad guy? It seems fairly obvious, like what you said, as far as that push in on him, the way he is so smarmy, the way he's slapping Jake on the shoulder when he's looking through the telescope, like, oh yeah, did you see her face? All those kind of things. He's just painted as a villain right from the beginning.
Even in the bar when he's trying to comfort him, like the way that he looks at the camera with a sinister kind of, maybe I'm projecting. It seems like there's like a slightly sinister aspect to his expression when he asks, for another round of drinks when he's, after that that acting workshop. Like there's so much to suggest that he's a villain, and there's not really any other characters introduced that could be red herrings other than, like you mentioned, Gloria's lover. It's funny. I read a review of this that described her as a nymphomaniac. And I was thinking about, like, is she a nymphomaniac because she has one lover and she's going to have, a sexy encounter coming up in another scene we're going to be talking about? But is she really, she just seems like a very damaged or vulnerable person, in an abusive relationship. But I didn't get the impression that that's how we're supposed to read her.
Right. She's not even the one masturbating.
Yeah, who knows how long ago she got off? It could have been forever ago.
Yeah, I took her to be more like the Angie Dickinson character in Dressed to Kill, like somebody that's in an unhappy marriage that is maybe cruising for a little bit of action, but isn't necessarily, unsympathetic or, even, that outrageous a character. Maybe that she's alienated, and, that's maybe the one thing that, like, I could say, but like I find that funny that was like some writer's interpretation of her character. But I mean, all of her scenes are like, so many of them do have like a sexual component, but that's an erotic thriller for you.
And it's as if both she and Angie Dickinson get punished as a result of their indiscretions as well. Angie Dickinson, not only does she catch the STD, but then she gets slashed up in the elevator.
Yeah, and then Gloria ends up with one of the most gruesome deaths that I've seen in a long time in movies.
Outside of Italian horror or giallo. The last time I watched it, I wasn't sure what the motivation for her leaving her newly bought underwear behind was.
Those are the old underwear. She's wearing the new underwear.
Oh, that makes sense. She just ditches it in a flower pot, though.
Yeah, that is kind of weird that she's like, okay, I guess it's that when you go buy new shoes and you're like, I'll wear these out, and the sales girl like wraps the old ones or something. So yeah, it's weird. I've never bought a single pair of underwear. Mine usually come in like 6-packs. So I'm unfamiliar with the protocol as far as how you dispose of the old underwear. And I love the story that the screenwriter tells about how he thought that De Palma was crazy for having Jake pocket the underwear the first time around. Like when De Palma's like, yeah, and of course Jake takes the underwear, and Robert Average is like, what are you talking about? And it's like, no. And then later on, when Jake is being interviewed by the police and the police find the underwear on him, it's like, oh, okay. And that never dawned on the screenwriter. That was just like a De Palma thing where he's like, yeah, no, you put that in and then you pull it out later and make him seem really bad. So it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. He is the worst detective, and he ends up getting caught by Gloria. And I love when he's just like, somebody's following you. And she's like, yeah, I know. And he's like, no, it's not me. I always wonder if she does mean him or if she knows that the Indian is following him, but I think she means him.
Yeah, I think that's how I read that line.
And I don't think that this tunnel thing is necessarily in the screenplay. So again, it's this play on the claustrophobia. I mean, this seems like the most basic thing in the world. Like, if you are manipulating Jake Scully, you are going to run into a place where he is going to freak out and be completely ineffectual. This is taking Scotty up to the top of the tower and ditching the real Madeleine Albright, or not Madeleine Albright, the real Madeleine Elster off of that tower and having, the Judy Madeleine person up there with him. You are going to put Jake Scully into a situation where he is completely powerless, though it is a little much in that he doesn't even seem to realize that it's the key card that he stole. So I guess maybe that wasn't why this wasn't in the screenplay originally, that it's just an act of heroism that he manages to get the purse back. But again, in this version, in the final movie version, he is completely powerless. He is completely emasculated, that Gloria then has to walk him out of the tunnel after she basically comes to his rescue, and that we have Bouchard there as the Indian giving this triumphant whoop. And I love that the whoop is manipulated, that there's more to it than just his voice, that there's something underneath that whoop. kind of a cool thing that it's that there's more to this, and that it's more sinister than just a guy like giving a cheer.
It's so funny because I never buy him experiencing another freezing, debilitating bout of claustrophobia in this corridor that just seems so much larger than the other spaces that we see experience it in.
I like when he's tailing her at the beginning of that sequence, how there's a shot where he's going underground, like an underground car park of some kind. And it's like the first hint that he's going to have to deal with claustrophobic situations if he's going to keep up with her on this chase. But yeah, I think, and then the elevator scene also, I know, Mike, you had mentioned that that moment reminded you of Raising Cain.
Yeah, I guess, is there an elevator at that hotel in Raising Cain? That's what I was thinking, that there's some sort of an elevator that happens in Raising Cain.
Yeah, it's at the climax of the film, when what is her name? The wife is taking the elevator up, and she's with her husband who's in the, the female police psychologist's clothing. Like he's in drag, the Lithgow character. They encounter his father at the top of the elevator. Like it's a whole intricate sequence based in an elevator. And of course, Dressed to Kill has the big elevator murder scene also. Like there's definitely like some mileage he gets out of that location. Maybe not as much as showers, but he does like his elevator shots.
Just as an aside, I hated Raising Cain the first time that I saw it, and it wasn't until I heard an episode of Movie Geeks United where they were talking about Raising Cain that I really started to come to appreciate it more as being kind of the and I know some people would say that Mission to Mars is the ultimate De Palma film, but Raising Cain is kind of the ultimate De Palma. It's like he's playing with his own tropes by that time and building this whole new story. I just picked up the Blu-ray that has the unofficial director's cut. It seems like a fan edit that then eventually got released as a director's cut, which is a very interesting story. But I think that was another thing why I chafed against that movie watching it the first time, was just like, this movie doesn't gel. And then reading the script years later, I was like, oh, okay, now this makes sense. The way that the script was set up was so different than the final product, and then putting it back together in my mind, which then eventually got put together on this Blu-ray, I was like, oh, this makes a lot more sense had they done it this way. I guess it was just another one of those like greatest hits, and seeing this elevator scene, I was just like, there's something about this that's recalling Raising Cain, but I can't remember. So yeah, yet another De Palma elevator.
Didn't he have to completely swap the narrative around in Raising Cain? So the John Lithgow part did it come second and the Lolita Davidovich part came first?
That fan edit that is De Palma approved and on the Arrow, and probably, I think, who did it as well, Shout Factory, like the Blu-ray versions, yeah, that is a De Palma approved fan edit. I was going to say about Raising Cain and Body Double is that they remind me of each other in that they both feel like De Palma, like directors don't always have a lot of control over what film comes next in a career, but those both feel like deliberate reactions to the film that he just got finished making that was like a big production, maybe not always a happy experience, a lot of compromises or fights. And this, he's coming off of Scarface and, whatever challenges he might have had making that film, and like a big production. Body Double feels like a return to what people expect from him, which is like a Hitchcockian thriller, but it's weirder than the other ones. Like it's a stranger film stylistically and thematically than something like Obsession or Dressed to Kill. And Raising Cain is even weirder than that. It's a very off-putting, quirky movie that it feels like a return to the Hitchcockian thrillers, but like it's him impatient with the form and trying all sorts of things that may or may not work, because he's just done it so many times already. But that one was coming off of the Bonfire of the Vanities. So it's like the same kind of logic where it's like, let me go back to something small scale and what I know that I can do better than my contemporaries, like this kind of very designed thriller. But in both cases, they feel like weirder takes on the Hitchcock thriller thing than I think what he started out with in the 70s.
Well, according to that Double De Palma book, he wasn't even supposed to be directing Body Double, that he wanted to move on to another project, and then ended up directing this anyway, almost reluctantly at first, but this is, to me, one of the De Palma films. You talk about his style, you talk about everything that he does. I mean, it's right there in line, like, Sisters to Dressed to Kill to this, it's such like it's so linear that he would work on this next. And yeah, this is a much more controlled, contained De Palma than it sounds like, Jim, you weren't a big fan of Scarface either. I've never been able to make my way through that film. And so it's just, it's a tough watch for me. And this one is like such a palate cleanser, and I just absolutely love it.
The screenwriter for this was, I think, hired to do like a war film. And maybe I can't remember maybe you've talked to him about it, but there was a different project that he was hired on to do. But then when Body Double came into being, that they were intentionally marrying Rear Window and Vertigo tropes together with other ideas. But he was hired for a much different kind of project. Even around the time of Scarface, he was pushing this as a potentially X-rated film. I don't know if we'll get to that later, but just the notion of him taking on this material, but more graphic and more sexual. Even the script seems more sexual than the final film, because I know this ran into MPA troubles also, and I'm trying to think what it could even be that got them into trouble. I mean, the murder is more suggested than shown, and then the sexuality of it, I mean, it was definitely a different time, but I'm trying to think what would have been objectionable other than, I'm guessing the masturbating shots are described more in the script, the Holly body dance routine that, he's seeing. Maybe I'm just guessing because I've never read specifically what he had to cut.
So I mentioned before the possibility of magic in this movie, and one of the reasons why I bring that up is the idea of, after Gloria rescues Jake and walks him out of the tunnel, they start to kiss, and it becomes this magical kiss. And really the magic to me is that, why would they kiss? It doesn't make any sense. He's been following her around. Maybe she was just really randy for Philip, and when he wasn't around, she ended up choosing Wasson. But Wasson, like I said, Jake Scully is not the greatest looking guy. He doesn't seem like he would be fantastic in bed. I think Barbara Crampton would agree. So she just goes for it with this guy, and it becomes this crazy, super over-stylized shot that, again, is right out of Vertigo. And I'm watching it and I'm thinking, okay, what are they going to cut this with? Because the Vertigo shot that I'm talking about, and that you guys already know, but I'm just saying it for the listeners, is the shot where Scotty finally gets his new Madeline. He gets Judy to dress up like Madeline, and they start to kiss in that hotel room, and the camera is spinning around them one way, and the turntable that they're on is spinning around another way. And at one point it stops, and it becomes them in the carriage house, I guess it is, or wherever this church is, and it becomes this other scene of the real Madeline, or who he thinks is the real Madeline, and then they continue on with that. So he's basically making love to Madeline when he's really making love to Judy. And we'll get that later on, which is nice that this shot returns. But in this shot, they're just spinning around and doing all this stuff, and it's this process shot. So the background plate has been shot one day. They're shot in a studio, so it looks really, again, very fake, but in a good way, like, again, calling attention to itself. But it just is such a strange thing, and then it just ends almost as soon as it begins, where it's just like, no, I can't do this, and she goes off. This was the shot that really garnered my attention when I was a kid, other than, Holly Bonnie and her boobs and everything, was just like, oh my God, this is so bizarre. Why is this happening? It just, not knowing Vertigo, I had no frame of reference for this, and I just was completely confused why all of a sudden the music swells and they're engaged in this kiss when they've never been introduced and have no chemistry together.
Yeah, that's another thing that feels completely shoehorned for me, is that they're sort of just using the same technique for that they use in Vertigo. But you're right, there's no functionality to it, because you don't fade to the carriage house, so there's no real need to shoot it in front of a green screen. I mean, they use it to sort of mirror the same moment with Holly. But again, the use of the green screen, the process shot, just is really baffling to me.
Do you think this moment works? Because De Palma doesn't think it does, because he intended it to work as an earnest romantic moment. Like the music, like it's not played for laughs in his head. But when you watch it now, it feels so exaggerated and over the top that it feels like it's meant to be an ironic comment on this type of scene. And I think that because the film has so many postmodern aspects that a contemporary audience would see this scene and maybe think that he's making fun of convention, or that he's like, that it's like Almodovar or David Lynch or somebody commenting on genre film convention. But he's not. But it works great as like a ridiculous piece of camp or something. Like it doesn't hurt the film for fans of it now, but it doesn't work as maybe he intended it to. Do you agree with that? I mean, what do you feel like this film takes you out of the film, or does it take you further in because it's so ridiculous?
This part takes me out. Later on, when this same thing happens with Holly Body, then it works for me, because then we get the payoff to the shot, which is the camera's stopping or slowing down for a moment, and he's not with Holly anymore. He's with Gloria, and then it continues. So he's basically making love to Gloria while he's really in actuality making love to Holly. So that switch, the original intention of the Hitchcock shot, works for me, but this on its own and just this out of nowhereness does take me out of it, and I do laugh at this moment. I don't know if I should or not, but it always is just so overblown that I can't help but laugh.
Part of the enjoyment and the love of this film is how absurd it is. Like, I find myself laughing completely throughout this film, and I feel like it's a logical progression, or illogical rather, progression of increasingly absurd elements where you see this guy watching this woman who shouldn't know that she's being watched, but she's doing this dance and masturbating, clearly not for herself, but for whoever's watching. And then you get this moment in the hallway with the vertigo shot, and then that, I think, transitions so nicely into the, again, like completely insane murder, and then the video within a movie relax porn scene. So I feel like it all makes sense in like this insane pastiche De Palma roller coaster that is this movie.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that call themselves out, call attention to themselves. I mean, the idea of De Palma being this master of style and bringing all these things to the fore. I mean, you know, as I'm watching this movie, I'm just like, wow, you can't get more vaginal than this symbolism. Like, I was talking about the curvy house and stuff, but I'm thinking things like the safe that's inside of her room that she goes into before the masturbation thing. She goes in the safe and pulls out the jewels and does all this stuff. And then we see her husband reach into the safe, and it's very much a violation of everything. It's just like, okay, or the Indian trying to get into the safe, and it's just like, okay, yeah, this is basically a rape with him trying to get into the safe. And then talking about the Indian with this phallic drill that he's got, and just that, I mean, that is so exaggerated, and you get the exaggerated big things like the chemisphere, these kind of, you know, just like, hey, there's a dick on screen right now. You get that kind of stuff, and then you get the, hey, I'm going to take your purse and throw it onto the bed. Boom, we've got this vagina kind of thing happening here. Jake reaching into the bag and pulling out the underwear, these kind of things, that it's just so exaggerated and so in your face that I can't help but think, okay, yeah, all of this stuff is exaggerated to make the larger point.
Oh, sure. I think he's completely aware of what he's doing. I also think it's kind of this thing that us looking at it after the fact, decades later, it has even more of a intensity in a new context. Like De Palma famously claims to have not understood the phallic imagery of the drill. He just said basically he needed something that would go from the second floor to the first floor, which is such a weird, literal way to think of that.
I tend not to trust him when he says things like that. I mean, you look at something like Hi Mom, and De Niro's character is a voyeur photographer in that film, and he's commenting on the phallic nature of buildings that he's photographing. Like, De Palma's not stupid. Like, he knows this stuff. I mean, obviously, when the drill shot that is coming up, that is one of the most famous shots in the film, there's no mistaking it. So when he says things like that, you wonder how much he's just being a glib promoter, because he's so matter of fact about many aspects of the film, but when it comes to themes, he's really coy in a way that is, you can't really trust when he says things like he didn't understand the phallic imagery of the drill when it's like coming between a guy's legs. Like there's no way he wouldn't have noticed that.
Which is so interesting because I don't understand the need to be coy at any point when you're Brian De Palma and you have already made this movie,
I think it's just to agitate feminist film theorists further. Like, I think he just never really let that go.
Yeah, he does like to push buttons, and I think that's one of the reasons why he got in so much trouble over stuff like this and Dressed to Kill and Scarface is because he likes to stir up shit, and I respect the guy for that. We are finally at our third night of Jake at the house, and he is there pretending to make a phone call to Gloria. And at first I thought that he was making a phone call to her. Now he knows her name and he's able to call over there. And he's just like, yeah, I'm the guy you almost fucked on the beach today. But instead he gets a phone call from Sam, who's basically making sure that everything is in position. This is like the 5 minutes to curtain kind of a call. And yep, I'm still here. I'm still in the house. I'm still watching, and it's showtime now. And this is the big night. This is what everything has been leading up to. There's no pre-masturbatory show. This is the main event. And this is the drill killing that we've been talking about. And this is in the era where, we have the driller killer happening and stuff. Well, we're introduced to this dog, which we've never seen before, as far as I know. And I love that this is the white dog from Sam Fuller's White Dog, which was accused of racism. It's such a weird reason why that movie was kind of shit-canned. I mean, it's basically an anti-racist film that's accused of being racist, but this is one of those dogs. Apparently they had 3 dogs, and this was at least one of them. They had a nice dog, a little bit more aggressive dog, and then the one that would want to rip your face off when they let it out of the cage. And Jake gets to meet, that version of it. It looks like it's really close between his house and Gloria Rebel's house, but there's a lot of space he has to travel. And then there's also hesitation. He's trying to call the police and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, this is the whole sequence of the driller killer, which, like I said, this was one of the most gruesome things that I had ever seen at this point, watching this the first time. And it still skeezes me out when I watch it today.
When Sam calls to make sure he's watching, I love that, like, the next time you see the Indian, he still has the phone in his hand. Like, if you didn't put it together already, the Indian is putting the phone away before he carries out the murder. But, I wonder if there was, I haven't really thought this through too well, but if there's something he's trying to say about the distances between people geographically in Los Angeles versus if this scene were happening in New York, everyone's so close together, but it takes him like 20 minutes to get from, his house to the house next door. And it's too far a distance for him to save the girl. If there was something, all the driving they have to do to get from place to place. But, as far as the murder, this is funny to me because this is maybe one of the scenes that caused the film to fail commercially, because it was talked about as like this extremely graphic killing sequence. And I read pieces from the time that talk about like how you see the drill go through the woman and it's horrible, but De Palma felt it was necessary. You never really see her impaled by it. It's more suggested. Like, you see the aftermath of it, but it's really just all misdirection. And the horrible shot of the drill going through the floor and the blood, it's very shocking still. How many times I've seen it, but you don't actually see her getting stabbed by anything. It's kind of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like, it's all just in the way that it's edited. You think you're seeing more than you are.
Yeah, you do see it sticking out of her once he's done drilling through her, but I'm also curious as to how much he had to cut out.
I think the most brutal part for me is when you are watching the Indian from behind and it looks like he's basically like kicking her, standing on her legs and standing on her neck maybe. Like, you just see the way that he's holding his legs out and it looks like he's standing on her to keep her still before he puts the drill in her. And again, that's all from the back. It's all from just the way that the legs are, that you think that this stuff is going on. You don't see this stuff. So yeah, it's wonderful that way. And I love the way that when Jake is on the ground, he looks up and he sees the drill bit come through the floor. And with that blood, it's just like, oh, it is so disgusting. The way that De Palma plays with us, that the fucking drill is plugged into the wall, and when the cord comes out, I mean, that is masterful. That it seems like we're going to get away from this drill, and that he knocks himself out. The Indian gets knocked out by his own drill and everything. And there's that moment where they're struggling and all that. I love that he is just dragging this scene on and just ratcheting up the tension every single time. That it's like he'll give us a little bit more and then he'll give us a reprieve, and then a little bit more and then give us the reprieve. And then when they have basically what ends up, you could call it the cum shot of the drill coming through the floor, that's it. We know that there's no more saving Gloria. And that also gives us time when it comes to Jake trying to get over there and the whole, having to run down the stairs. I mean, we saw the guys taking a funicular to get up to the chemisphere before, and now him running down the stairs, running down that long street. And we saw that she came down a long driveway before, so now he's going to have to get up that. And, the house has, it's closed off. The dog's there and everything. So just so many things for him to try to overcome to get there, and that they're cutting that with these little moments of reprieve. It's just like, he could do it. No, he's not going to. Oh, he could do it. No, he's not going to. And then, finally it's curtains on Gloria.
We mentioned earlier that this is like something out of a giallo or an Italian horror film. And, the original screenplay had a drowning instead of a drill murder, when the drowning would have been very much like something out of, Deep Red or Blood and Black Lace, like that kind of murder. But, I think maybe just coming off of the controversy and the MPAA battle over the chainsaw attack in Scarface, this feels like no power tools and controversy. That's my business. Let me rewrite this, and it becomes the most horrifying set piece. But the power tools murder thing, it's also a nod, obviously, to Drill or Killer and maybe even Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and to some extent.
And the whole scene of him getting interviewed by the cops, that's right out of something like Vertigo again. And I know I've mentioned Vertigo a ton. I haven't mentioned Rear Window. And the really, for me, the Rear Window stuff is looking at Miss Torso across the way, or looking at when Grace Kelly goes across the way and they see that the killer is there. They see that Raymond Burr is in the apartment, or those moments where Raymond Burr is there smoking the cigarette and you just see that little red dot across the way and stuff. So those moments of helplessness that what is it? I love that both of these characters, both played by Jimmy Stewart, both have these weird names. So it's L.B. Jeffries when it's Rear Window, and then it's John Scotty Ferguson, Scotty in quotes, that they have these kind of similar nickname names. But the helplessness that L.B. Jeffries has as he's over there across the way with the cast on his leg, and he can't do anything when he sees that his girl's in trouble. And kind of the same way, Jake's there looking at Gloria, and he can try to do stuff, but he's not ever going to be able to save her. And then, after she gets murdered, we have the interview with the police detective, and it is very similar to the whole Henry Jones tribunal thing that Scotty goes through in Vertigo, where it's just like, let me completely humiliate you, let me emasculate you, let me give you all as much shame as I possibly can, and just make you feel as terrible as possible about you because you were ineffectual and you couldn't save this girl.
What's this?
Pants, some underpants.
Yours?
No.
Where'd you get them?
Okay, I got it all down. Let's take it down. All right, see you then.
She dropped them in the trash.
Who?
Gloria.
And you just picked them up?
Yeah.
Why? Come on, Scully, tell the truth. You fucked her and you kept them for a souvenir.
No.
No what? No, you didn't fuck her? No, you didn't keep them as a souvenir?
No to both of them.
Oh, maybe you're just a harmless panty sniffer. Is that it?
Oh, you got a dirty mind.
That's a laugh. You peep on her, you follow her, you fuck her, you keep her little panties as a memento, and then you take a seat on the 50-yard line and watch her being
everything
slaughtered.
around. That's not what happened. I tried to save her.
Watch your step there. Make sure you clear the doorway.
Mm-hmm. Some save, Scully. Some save. Remind me to never put my life in your hands.
Speaking of Hitchcock references, do we mention that the murder has a whiff of Dial M for Murder as well with the phone cord?
Oh, yeah, I totally didn't get that. Thank you for pointing that one out.
I didn't really want to psychoanalyze De Palma too much as far as like he's coming off a divorce because him and Nancy Allen split right before this movie. Like, I don't know that he's necessarily trying to exercise anything.
So then the movie takes this really interesting turn, and we've gone from Jake the voyeur to now we become Jake the investigator. After you've seen someone brutally murdered, I imagine that some time has passed because he's got a good semi-growth of beard. He's got at least a Don Johnson going on here, which is appropriate because he's about to get introduced to the Melanie Griffith character, Holly Body. And, which again is great that he's, De Palma's now working with the daughter of Tippi Hedren in this film. Her character is based a lot on the actress Annette Haven, and in the indicator disc, De Palma goes out of his way to never say her name, which really kind of hurts. Being that guy who people have referred to every once in a while as some guy, it always kills me when it's like, how much is it going to take for you to actually say the person's name rather than, I interviewed this actress or I was talking to this actress, and it's just like, no, say the woman's name. So say Annette Haven's name. But yes, she basically helped build the entire Holly Body character, and from what I understand, she was even up for the role in audition, and then she ended up not getting the role, but then still being an advisor to Melanie Griffith and kind of helping her out with the role, which seems kind of a humiliating thing to me.
Yeah, and she pops up in the relax sequence as well, which is also interesting that you mentioned that he actively excises her name from the Indicator Blu-ray, because in the Noah Baumbach De Palma documentary, he has no problem name checking her.
I wanted to use somebody that would be used to doing nudity, so I thought, well, why don't I get a porn star? I'd become very close to Annette Havens, who was a fascinating character. Because she was an adult actress entertainer, I basically created the whole character based around Annette. She had never, of course, auditioned for a movie in her life. It was old news to her. It was a big scandal when I wanted to test Annette, because Annette was a porn star, and the head of the studio heard I was testing a porn star down on stage 7. They said to me, "You can't do that." This is when Columbia was owned by the Coca-Cola Company. And I said, "Sorry, I'm doing it." And I did. I tested her and Melanie. I couldn't get anybody else to do the part, basically. There was so much nudity. The big thing that came out of Body Double was Melanie. That's what everybody wrote about. And I had all this material from Annette. All those stories all came from Annette.
I do not do animal acts. I do not do S&M or any variations of that particular bent. No water sports either. I will not shave my pussy. No fist fucking, and absolutely no coming in my face.
And she studied Annette. We had Annette come down, and she was on the set. She was the bright spot in the movie that everybody sort of felt very happy about. After beating me down, all they could talk about was Melanie.
My guess is that maybe because Sony was distributing the DVD, that those extras that Indicator recycles, those are from a DVD from Sony. And I know that with MGM's Last House on the Left, they omitted any mention on the packaging of Fred Lincoln because of his porn connections. So I don't know if they are that squeamish still about mentioning specific people involved in the adult film industry. That was my only guess why they would be that way, because clearly he talks about her openly in other places. So yeah, I noticed that as well, that they don't mention her at all by name. But it is odd, that they would acknowledge the adult film connection, but then nothing specific. But in the script, Holly Body has a scene where she mentions her acting credits, and she does mention Dracula Sucks, which is an Annette Haven film, as well as Misty Mozart, which is a reference to Barbara broadcast director Radley Metzger's opening of Misty Beethoven. So there's a lot of Holly Body's backstory that comes from Annette Haven. A lot of her dialogue that was in the script only seems to be biographical details that De Palma got from interviewing her. But yeah, it was controversial for him to even bring her to the set to try her out for the film. And he said that he didn't hire her because she couldn't play like this certain kind of light, flirty, vulnerable moments, that she had just become too, I'm paraphrasing, but maybe too toughened or too mannered from, so many adult film performances. I don't know if that's a cop-out and he just needed a Hollywood star for the part, or if that was really what happened, because it would have been a really bold choice for him to hire Annette Haven at that point, especially in the early 80s. Like, that anti-pornography protest cry would have had a field day with him casting an actual porno star.
Apparently, the really memorable Holly body monologue where she goes over her hard limits and requirements comes straight from Annette Haven as well.
This was that era, too, I think, where some porn actors were showing up in mainstream stuff. Like Ron Jeremy had a couple of mainstream roles, little bit parts and stuff, but it's just like, oh, yeah, there's Ron Jeremy. I mean, we mentioned Ghostbusters before. Not a speaking role, but at least Ron Jeremy makes a little bit of appearance. But I'm thinking things like, Caged Heat or something? He shows up in some sort of women in prison film and stuff, and it's just like, okay, so there was a little bit of crossover, but they still never quite made it. I mean, I'm trying to remember where 52 Pickup was. That seemed to be the movie where we could have both adult actors and quote unquote Hollywood actors working at the same time in the same project, but that did tie into the porn world, so it was kind of natural. But in here, again, it's kind of this left turn where we are into this porn world all of a sudden. The reference to Misty Mozart actually reminded me of the line from the movie Misty Beethoven.
What's your name?
Misty Beethoven.
Is that your real name?
No, it's not. I took it to sound more important.
What was it before?
Dolores Beethoven.
I should have guessed.
And I like the way that we are introduced to the Holly body commercial, Holly Does Hollywood, which in the script it was a movie called Peepers. So, and again, another voyeurism kind of thing, that we're introduced to her during this Sid Goldberg show, which is totally a play on Al Goldstein's Midnight Blue. And I love the character actor who's playing the Sid Goldberg role and the way that he is kind of taunting the porn actress who is talking about her love of having sex on screen and stuff, but it worked. And he's not nearly as skeezy as Al Goldberg or Al Goldstein, but it worked for me.
Yeah, I think it's funny that Sid Goldberg is interviewing an actress from Bold Obsession, and I wonder if that's a reference to De Palma's earlier riff on Vertigo. I didn't get a chance to read what Al Goldstein said about De Palma, because right after this film came out, Film Comment had a round table kind of section in one of their, I think the November-December issue of 1984, and Al Goldstein was one of a number of contributors commenting on De Palma and sexual violence in movies, both pro and con, his strategies. And I wonder if Al Goldstein even knew he was mentioned in the original screenplay to this.
Yeah, that was L.A. at Midnight with Al Goldberg, so it was pretty darn close to Midnight Blue with Al Goldstein. And then also another Obsession thing, I think Annette Haven was also in a movie called Obsession from 77, I want to say, which seems like an interesting one. It seems like a little bit of a roughie. I just recently acquired that movie. I have yet to watch it, but I'm very curious now. I want to see more of her stuff. I mean, you did mention Barbara Broadcast, and if you are going to watch one Annette Haven film, definitely watch Barbara Broadcast, because Henry Paris / Radley Metzger, we've talked about him many times on the show before. He knows his shit. He is a great, great director, and you really owe it to yourself to watch his stuff, especially his things like, for me, it's Score and the opening of Misty Beethoven, but Barbara Broadcast is right up there.
I like that Holly Does Hollywood, which is obviously, a Debbie Does Dallas, Candy Goes to Hollywood kind of mashup title, has elements that do resonate with the rest of the film. I mean, you have a peeping through a window shot, and you have a woman who's played by cult film actress Brink Stevens masturbating while lying on her back. Like, there's this could be like a little throwaway fake trailer, for a porno movie, but even that has all these things that tie in to the imagery of the rest of the film. And I don't think I even really paid attention to that the first few times I've seen this film, that it has, like, there's no accidental shots in anything that he does.
And then when he sees Holly doing her striptease routine or moving her body in the same way that he saw Gloria do, then the Pino Donaggio score comes up again with Gloria's theme, or at least a variation on her theme. So we're taken to that same place where Jake's mind is at, that this woman is acting just like the woman that was across the way. And so it's just like Scotty seeing Judy on the street and suddenly the light goes off. I don't think that he thinks that she's a reincarnation, but he wants to know what the hell's going on and why this woman across the way danced the same way that this woman does, or how this happened. So he goes on this two-prong attack of both auditioning for this role in a new movie that Holly Body is in, and then also playing a skeezy porn producer later on after he has this scene with Holly. And this scene with Holly, we've mentioned it several times, it's like a music video has been dropped into the middle of this movie, and I absolutely love it. It is Frankie Goes to Hollywood doing Relax, and it is a fantastic, fantastic song, though this sequence is nowhere near as risque as the actual video for Relax, which I never saw until just a few years ago. And when I saw that video for Relax, my jaw was on the floor.
So you're talking about the band one, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The one that takes place in the gay club, and there's basically cum stand-ins all over the place. And it is just, it's lunacy, and it's fantastic. It's brilliant. It seems like something that Tinto Brass would have directed.
The director of the video you're talking about, the band Relax, is Bernard Rose, who people might know from Candyman and Paper House and Immortal Beloved. I thought it was funny how similar, like, they're both set in like decadent nightclub situations. Like, he's still, retaining some element of that original Frankie Goes to Hollywood video, even though he's doing a more subtle film, than that original music video with the tiger wrestling and, ejaculating emperors and all that. The Frankie Goes to Hollywood sequence in Body Double, is Frankie, Goes to Hollywood being brought to old Hollywood. Like, there's these references to things like Sunset Boulevard with the Annette Haven, and even the choreography. I was trying to find what exactly they're referencing when Holly Johnson, another Holly Goes to Hollywood moment, the Holly Johnson, the lead singer of Frankie Goes to Hollywood, is like carried aloft by the crowd and then placed kind of on his side singing on the bar. I don't know if you know what film, from Hollywood musicals of old, like they're referencing there, but like it's acknowledging old Hollywood, but in this like, absurdly 80s new wave goth kind of dance club environment.
I was so curious how this even happened, because that Double De Palma book is fantastic, but it really feels like it ends too early. And I know that there's an author's note at the beginning that's like, okay, yeah, this manuscript was due at this time, and this was completed before post-production. And then it sounds like this Frankie Goes to Hollywood stuff happened later on in the process.
Maybe that's why he got Annette Haven in it too. I don't know. I don't know what the circumstances were for that shoot, because I found an interview with De Palma where he says that it was shot, he says too far later, like he says like 6 or 7 months later, which is impossible. But he did say that it was done after principal production had wrapped. And I think in between, De Palma filmed and made a hit music video for Bruce Springsteen with that Dancing in the Dark, but that's a concert video. So I don't know if that gave him the idea or what, because you have music videos earlier in the film, but this would have been him trying out the kind of quote unquote story music video, that would have been prevalent in the early 80s and incorporating it as a way to bring you to the sex scene between Jake and Holly Body, because I think originally it probably would have been closer to what's in the script, which would have been just them going straight into that sequence in the film with the the porno dialogue and I Like to Watch and all that. But this is such a more clever and fun way to get to that point in the narrative.
Well, I'm curious as to what point he filmed the other scenes that would then end up in the body double version of the Frankie Goes to Hollywood video that they released. Like, have you guys seen this with the Indian?
No.
There's a non-band Frankie Goes to Hollywood music video that is basically a version of what you see in the movie, but it's weird because they're changing the tone of it. Like the Indian is in on this party, and you also have Holly Johnson sort of peeking through a telescope and seeing clips from the other movie. Basically, he's peeking through a telescope and he sees what Jake Scully sees prior to Gloria getting murdered.
Yeah, I don't know if that video ever aired, though. I was trying to determine that because there's 4 videos for Relax. Because there's the Bernard Rose video that was banned, and then there was like one that was just very cheap early 80s style video with just performance, lip syncing with like laser beams. And then there was the De Palma version, which he says they didn't like, and they made another video. And then there's like a live version, like concert, like a performance, take on the song. So there's 4 different videos you can find of Relax.
Which is the only version I saw as a kid was the concert version. And then this, but yeah, I never saw the video edit, which, spoilers, I'm actually watching right now as we're talking about this. But, yeah, and then it wasn't until 2006 or so that I saw the Bernard Rose video. And that, like I said, I was just like, oh my God, how could this thing even exist? Oh yeah, I see what you mean. The Indian is in this version of this.
He pops up at like 1:30, and then right around like 2:40, Holly Johnson's like peeping through the telescope.
Yeah, I love the way that we are introduced to Holly Body in this, the way that Jake Scully goes through the door and is framed there with the mirror and with her body, and then that dialogue happens. It's such a nice framing. And then the way that he is dressed with that sweater and the glasses. I mean, I know this is right around the time of Tim Busfield in Revenge of the Nerds, but it really feels like they're kind of blood brothers at this point. And those stupid little things like him moving back and forth and up and down to the music, it's so simple, but is just so goofy and so perfect for this that he plays that character, because basically him in the sweater and glasses is Jake Scully to me. Like, he is more Jake Scully in that outfit than he is the rest of the time, where he's trying to be kind of a cool guy and stuff, because he's such a dork through this entire movie.
Do you think that the claustrophobia is something that we're meant to equate with impotence? And do you think that...
Oh, yeah.
And so do you think that his ability to be porno film level of sexually, the virility that he exhibits in the Holly Body scene, I mean, do you think that that's like we're meant to read too much into, like, because it's never established that he's impotent, even if, you know, his relationship ended, you know, pretty abruptly at the beginning of the film. It's never indicated that he's a bad lover. We just maybe intuit it just from him being weak about everything else, but that it is the identification with Gloria in that moment that, yeah, his virility kicks into gear finally. I just wasn't sure how you read that, if you thought of it as an impotency thing that he's overcoming in that moment.
I mean, I've always taken Scotty's vertigo to be a symbol of impotence, and by proxy, I take Jake's claustrophobia to be a symbol of his impotence. And then it seems like the only way that he's really getting it up with Holly is that he is seeing it as he's making love to Gloria, and something in her has triggered. Maybe it's that he has been peeping on her for so long, even though he wasn't peeping on her, he was actually peeping on Holly Body. So I don't know. To me, that's the way that I take it. And again, it's this kind of moment of magic, you know, like, again, I don't think that he is probably an amazing lover at all, but it really feels like Holly Body is getting off on having sex with him. Like, he is a great lover, and he definitely, ejaculates, but there's no cum shot. And I love that they call it out for that.
Yeah. I take for granted how that must have been a shocking line for a Hollywood thriller in the 80s.
And I do like that later on she says he didn't even know what a cum shot was. And it was just like, okay, did he not know the term or did he not know that he had to pull out and do that? One thing, just as a quick aside here, there was a time, I can't even remember what year it was, but I remember specifically killing time at a mall and going into the bookstore at the local mall, and they would have these books, like this whole series of books called movie flubs. And there were a lot of things where it was just like, oh, if you watch the cigarette changes length in this scene or blah, blah, blah. And they called out this movie because you saw the camera crew in the reflection of the mirror when Jake closes the door. And that used to drive me up a fucking wall because it's just like, guys, you're supposed to see the camera crew when he closes the door. That's the whole point, is that we see that this is a set, that this is a video that's being shot. This is a movie that's being shot. This is very much on purpose. And that was one of those moments where had I owned that book, I would have thrown it across the room and just, stomped on it. But it's just like, how incompetent can you be that you think that that's a mistake?
Clearly they're not appreciating the film as much as we are. So that's part of your rage.
And as quick as we've seen Jake as the nerd, we then see him then as this scuzzy porn producer. And then, yeah, to your point, Jim, I really appreciate seeing him in something else other than that same uniform that he's been wearing through this entire thing. And the way that he is kind of talking the talk and walking the walk with Holly. And we finally get some good Melanie Griffith here. And actually getting to see her doing a pretty decent sized role in this and doing a great job with it. And I love this relationship between these two characters and the way that, does she trust him? Does she not trust him? The way that he has to build, earn her trust, those kind of things. A lot of this reminds me of Jack and Sally from Blowout. I think that's probably intentional. I think that whole idea of the movie guy with the, sex worker or adult film worker, those kind of roles playing off of each other, I think was very intentional to have that same type of dynamic with these two characters.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that when she's in danger at the end, you have this, at least if you've seen Blowout, you have this sick feeling to yourself, like, oh, is he going to go that route again? I don't know if I want to give away the ending to Blowout, but it's a tragic, conclusion of that. And it's, that he's willing to go there and put a likable character in danger. You had mentioned that you felt like Gloria and Holly were both ciphers, but I feel like there's a little bit more to this character than just that. I mean, I think there's a lot of a real person in there because so much of it seems to be coming from Annette Haven as a person that it feels like the movie really comes to life in a different way when this character is introduced. And I think that this is probably the one person that really benefited from Body Double at all, is because I think this led to her doing something wild and then onward and upward for a good stretch of the 80s and 90s as far as becoming a proper movie star after being in the business for a while. She brings a lot of humor to the film as well. Like and again, that comes from Annette Haven. So I sometimes wonder how it would have played with her in the role.
I know Annette Haven did not like Holly's hairstyle and that she was saying like punk wasn't in at this point. And it's true. There weren't a lot of actresses that were rocking this kind of hairstyle. It kind of reminds me of Seika a little bit, but Seika's hair around this time was a little bit longer. And then as I was watching this, I'm quizzing Heather Drain about different porn actresses, and I'm just like, I remember this woman, I think her name was Viper, and she's like, oh yeah, Viper was more punk, and then she turned me on to Lois Ayers, who also seemed to be kind of rocking a punk look around Body Double time. But yeah, for a while there, it was very unusual to see adult actresses with any sort of tattoos or short hair or anything that wasn't the, American ideal of beauty at that time. So it was, obviously that has changed. Now you can't watch an adult film without seeing women with tattoos and stuff. And that makes me sound like an old man or something, but that's just kind of the way of the world. Bodies change, hairstyles change, interest rates fluctuate, and porn actresses have tattoos now. Rocket. So, but yeah, it was funny to me that was the one thing that she really objected about, was that porn actresses do not have punk looks to them.
Yeah, I read somewhere that Seika had said that she turned down being Melanie Griffith's body double in this film, which doesn't make any sense at all to me, but that's something I'd read. I also found a comment from Annette Haven herself on YouTube a few years ago, and she said, "I was very happy to get out of Body Double. Brian turned it into a drill fest." So maybe they had a falling out, and that's why he doesn't mention her by name. I don't know, but.
So I want to fast forward a little bit here and get to where Jake thinks that he has everything figured out. And I love this whole fake flashback that we have from Jake's recollection of things. And it really presages something that we're going to see a few years after this, which is Mission Impossible, where we have the Tom Cruise character, Ethan Hunt, figuring out things and us seeing his recollection of stuff through his POV as he's going through. And I know that actually threw some people. I remember Denzel Washington talking about how terribly confusing Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible movie was, which really perplexed me. I'm just like, how could you be confused by that movie? But okay, he didn't like that whole idea of the figuring out of stuff and showing things that may not be 100% true, because the thing that I like the most about this series of images that we're getting from Jake's recollection to say how Alexander Revell set up this whole situation. He knows that now that Revell is Bouchard, but he does not know that Bouchard is the Indian. And so we get this great shot of the Indian with his mirrored sunglasses, and we see Sam Bouchard's reflection in those mirrored sunglasses. And it's just like, oh, that's nice. He's wrong at this point, but it's such a great moment of him saying like, no, this happened, this happened, this happened. And then it isn't until he's down in this grave and the Holly body has been kidnapped and thrown into this grave that we get the confluence of events now of the claustrophobia, the final claustrophobia scene, and then him pulling the makeup off of the Indian's face and revealing Sam underneath there. So that is such a nice moment when he realizes, and when he actually is surprised, it's like, Sam, like Sam's going to stop when he does that. He says it like by saying his name, like, it's Jake. Hey, what are you doing, Sam?
Right, he's like, hey, snap out of it, buddy.
Exactly.
And speaking of Mission Impossible, it just occurred to me too that Emilio Estevez dies in an elevator in that movie, or rather on top of one.
And it has an unmasking scene as well. Like that's not dissimilar.
I think he gets one of those spikes right through his eyes, if memory serves.
Right in the eyes, yeah.
Ooh, yeah, that was bad.
He gets drilled as well.
Yeah, and this ending really gave them a lot of problems. Like, this is not the ending that we read in the screenplay. Again, I mentioned before the dog was not in the screenplay, so the dog being there and alerting Sam to Jake's presence and all this was not part of it. And the easily breakable glass of Sam's truck window, it's got to take a lot for a dog to jump through glass like that. But hey, again, there's magic in this movie, so we'll just equate any sort of weird things with magic as far as that goes. But yeah, this is I love this whole sequence, and I love when Jake is powerless there at the bottom of the grave, and just those tall walls going up, and Sam's voice again being distorted and basically taunting him as he's pouring dirt down onto Jake and to Holly.
I just think it's funny that the dog breaks through the glass with the same ease that Jake Scully breaks through the grave in the script, where he's basically buried alive and then just somehow emerges.
Yeah, somehow he makes a little air pocket with his arm or something. I'm like, how does that work?
I had a really difficult time visualizing that ending. I'm glad we didn't have to watch it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, that original ending, it's confusing because it lingers on, so in the original ending, he's burying Holly body alive, and it's shown to be kind of sad that she's powerless, she's struggling, she's terrified, she's being buried alive, and it plays, at least in my head when reading it, like a kind of troubling, sequence. But then when Jake comes in to save her, she's in on it with Sam, and she ultimately, like, they bury him alive, like they team up, and that she's actually revealed to be a villain in a sense, and the way that De Palma reimagines it for the film, she becomes she's a likable character. She remains one of the good guys. And then they move the location of it from maybe like a wooded area to right on a body of water. So it has this ridiculous but wonderful kind of conclusion at the reservoir with the drowning and the dog.
Yeah, there's a reservoir, there's a dog. I'm seeing a pattern here.
When you were talking about how Jake discerns that Sam is in cahoots with the Indian, it was just reminiscent of when Jeffrey Beaumont in Blue Velvet is observing both Frank Booth and the well-dressed man, and there's a similar kind of reveal, right, that Frank Booth is the well-dressed man.
One well-dressed fucking man knows where your fucking cute little butt's hiding, huh? You stupid fuck.
There's probably whole term papers to be written about the parallels between Body Double and Blue Velvet. I mean, there's a lot, beyond the voyeurism and the stripping women and the witnessing of violent interactions. There's a shot at the beginning of the Vampire's Kiss where you find that the set carpenter has put his own name on one of the tombstones, and that's the kind of thing that you find in Blue Velvet in the Dorothy Vallen's apartment. There's the production designer put his own name in as one of the tenants. Like, there's lots of minor and major parallels between these two films. And I wonder if Lynch was aware of De Palma's film, because the script predates De Palma's film, but it came out like I think they finished it like a year after Blue Velvet, or a year after Body Double.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're both definitely drinking from that same Hitchcock well with a lot of this stuff. It's strange to me that Jeffrey Beaumont's first name starts with a J, that Jake Scully's first name starts with the J, Jack Terry from Blowout, and then Jake Scully was not the original name of the character in here. It was John Scully, and they call him John completely through the script, and so sometime after that they decided to go from a John to a Jake, which I think was good, but it's such a tough guy name compared to the character. I think maybe John would have been better, but he finally does live up to a Jake, and I love the way that we go from him in that grave to him in the previous grave, and the way that they pull him out. Like, we break all of a sudden and have this whole moment of him back on the set of Vampire's Kiss. And this is, again, one of those moments that separates this movie for me from just a typical, erotic thriller kind of a thing, that we can go to this moment and him interacting with Dennis Franz, and he's still wearing the jacket that he was wearing before, and it seems like he's on set, but it's not. It's almost like he's giving himself an internal pep talk, and before he can decide to finally, I don't want to say man up, but that's basically what he's doing in this, is he is, powering himself up in order to escape his phobia and stand up and pull that shovel and just luckily be there and duck at the right time for the dog to attack his owner and throw those two both into the water. And Holly never sees that at all and accuses Jake of being a necrophiliac, which I thought was really nice, since basically Scotty from Vertigo is a necrophiliac, that he wants to make love to this dead woman and recreates her as this live woman in order to have sex with her. So there's a lot of weird necrophilia stuff going on in that movie as well, and Holly calls him out for it here in Body Double. And then, we have the movie end on a successful note. Jake has been rehired now back to Vampire's Kiss. They got rid of that other bozo, I think Dennis Franz calls him, and we actually see the whole body doubling thing going on, and we see it set up, and then we get what the actual movie might look like if we were to watch this movie for real. And it's a nice way to have that in the credits, and we also get a nice shot of Holly Body there on set, and so it seems like now she and Jake are a thing, which is kind of a nice happy ending. And I thought it was nice that they moved that scene from the beginning of the script to the end of the film, and then adding Holly in there is a good way to really kind of wrap it up.
Yeah, it did feel to me, since you mentioned Blowout earlier, it did feel like if Blowout had a happy ending, like that kind of emotional beat. And I agree with you that it's a good thing that they moved this to the end. I know he was concerned that any mention of what body doubles are would be too much of a giveaway to what he was up to. Even the scene where he goes back to the Vampire's Kiss set to confront the Dennis Franz character. I think before that, when his agent calls to tell him that he's been fired, there's a line that doesn't appear in the film that they found a new face to stick on your body. Another tell that, there's something going on with, replacing people in that way. But, I love the ending to this. And it's also a reference to, Dress to Kill, because, Angie Dickinson's body double in the shower. I don't know if that's the germ of the idea, but that's definitely something that you can also, connect to an earlier De Palma film if you want.
So we're going to take a break and play a couple of interviews. First up is screenwriter Robert J. Averich. And then after that is the Indian / Sam Bouchard / Alexander Revell himself, Greg Henry. And we'll be back with that right after these brief messages.
Are you tired of stubborn understains in your gusset? Do you suffer from a peculiar disease which only an expensive series of pills with appalling side effects can prolong? Do you long for a professional movie website and podcast with a sense of humor, insight, and passion that hasn't yet fallen under the thrall of the big studios and basically turned into a soulless marketing hub? Well, we can at least do the third thing. Head on over to aftermoviediner.com for all your genre film needs, Americana, movie podcast, comedy, incredibly large trousers, by fans for fans, without added salt, and relatively free of dripping. Our podcast is also available on Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, Stitcher, and wherever podcasts are found. The After Movie Diner. Come on in, won't you?
Do you like great music? Do you like in-depth podcasts? Do you like the idea of putting great music under the microscope? If you answered yes, no, or fish to any of these questions, Love That Album is the show for you. Every month, Morris and a fellow music fanatic discuss a particular album in detail. They'll cover the performer, the history behind the recording, the musicianship, common thematic elements between the songs, and how many drugs were consumed during its creation. Well, maybe not so much of the last bit. So, if you want to hear a podcast bringing perspective to great rock, jazz, folk, punk, and sea shanty music, then subscribe to Love That Album podcast at Apple Podcasts or download directly from lovethatalbum.blogspot.com.
I'm Dave Hunt, and I'm one of the co-hosts for Super True Stories, a podcast where two guys suffer through and report back on some of the worst documentaries you can stream for free.
And I'm Axel Cohagen, the other co-host. Film is a beautiful lie that teaches us about who we are on the inside. Dave and I look at the documentaries that are the ugliest of truths, teaching you about mixed martial arts and fishing, poorly faked ghost stories, and everything you wanted to know about core production values and stock footage.
Check us out on iTunes, Google Play, or at supertruestories.com.
I'm Chris Cooling from Forgotten TV, and you're listening to The Projection Booth, the ultimate movie podcast.
How did you decide to become a screenwriter?
It's the only thing I've ever wanted to do my whole life. I love movies. When I was a kid growing up in Brooklyn, I used to just watch movies all the time. I was a terrible student, have all sorts of disabilities in learning. Not a good situation for me in school, and I used to escape into the movies. And as a young child, I dreamed of becoming a screenwriter.
There's that interesting time when you realize that there's somebody actually writing the words that the people are saying on screen. When was that moment for you? Do you remember?
I think I was watching King Kong. I was very young. I was 8 or 9 years old, and my father was talking to me. And I think I was at the point where I believe that the actors made it up as they go along. And I think I asked my father a few questions, like how did the actors talk to the monster? I don't remember exactly, but he told me that there is a writer who writes the stories. And that clicked with me in a big way. And then when I was older, I saw a bunch of Hitchcock movies that had a huge effect on me. And I'd never quite seen anything like them. That sort of pushed me over the edge, especially Vertigo, Rear Window, Psycho. Those had a huge effect on me. And they were just so beautifully written and so beautifully directed and acted that kind of clinched the deal for me. I started writing screenplays in high school. I went to, my father was a rabbi. I was brought up in an Orthodox home, and I went to yeshivas my whole life, Orthodox yeshivas, which was a dual program where you studied Hebrew and religious subjects in the morning and then English in the afternoon. And I just was not a good student, as I said, and so I would spend basically all my time writing screenplays, in my little notebooks. And they were terrible, and I just kept writing hundreds and hundreds of them, I guess. And you have to understand, I was brought up in I was born in 1950, so quite a bit older. There were no film programs, and the culture that I was brought up in, everybody that I went to school with, all my friends became doctors, lawyers, accountants, and rabbis. And I just wanted to do something else. So it was an odd childhood, to put it mildly. And I'd never even seen a screenplay, so I just sort of made up the form as I went along.
Do you remember when the first time it was that you actually got to see a real screenplay?
I was in a bookstore and I saw 4 screenplays by Ingmar Bergman. And I bought that book, which I still have, and I'd never seen an Ingmar Bergman movie. And I read them, and that was very helpful to me.
Well, what did your folks think about you wanting to become a screenwriter?
Very, very worried. As I said, my father was an Orthodox rabbi. We're a very religious household, and very, Brooklyn, deep in the heart of Brooklyn. And they were just worried that it's not something that a religious Jewish boy should be doing with his life.
So how did you make the move from Brooklyn to Hollywood, or did you try your hand working in New York first?
I went to Israel for a couple of years, and I was there during the Yom Kippur War. I knew some young men who died in the war, and they were close friends. And I also was close with their wives and their girlfriends, and it had a big impact on me. And I wrote a screenplay basically based on, what I imagined the front would be for those soldiers and what it was like for their wives. But it was mostly about the wives and the girlfriends back home. And it was actually the first good screenplay that I ever wrote. I mean, it was very effective screenplay. And when I came back, and then I moved back to New York, I got a job at a film magazine. I just circulated the screenplay, sent it to every agent in New York. It got a respectful reads from a few people, and one of those people was Marty Bauer, who was Brian's agent. Brian read my work, read this particular script, and liked it very much. As just a sample, not something to make. He just thought it was a strong screenplay, and he met and he gave me a 5-page outline for Body Double. It was just bullet points. This happens, this happens, this happens. We sat and talked. We talked a lot about Hitchcock, and we got along. We had our aesthetics were tightly wound together. And he asked me if I wanted to write this film, and I said, sure. Yeah, of course.
What year was that? Do you remember?
1982, 83. No, it happened pretty quickly. I mean, I met him. We talked. We got along. I was very cheap, obviously. I was an unknown writer, one of these unknown writers. Brian was he was actually thinking of hiring another director, a guy that I knew, low-budget film director, to direct it, and he was going to produce. But it became very clear to me very quickly that Brian was not going to let somebody else direct this when we were working on the script. I mean, he cared too much. He was too specific, and I just knew very early on that Brian was going to direct it. He just let this other director go very quickly, and he and I worked on it together.
Where does Blood Bride or Death of a Nun, where does that fit into things?
It's a low-budget feature that I wrote and directed, and that is thankfully forgotten and buried and nobody's ever seen. It's just not terribly good. Never really worked.
Well, what was that process once you and Brian De Palma got together to hash out, you talked about those bullet points that you got. How do you work out the beats and come up with what ends up being Body Double?
I went off and I worked out the beats myself. I have a tremendous respect for Brian. I think he's just an amazing director when he's on his game, when he's just the best there is. And I considered that my job was just to make the story as airtight as possible. Brian would take care of the style. He would take care of the camera movements and all that stuff that he's so good at. I felt that, like many directors, where Brian might get lost is in the story. And so my job as a storyteller was to make this as airtight plot as possible when you're dealing with this kind of crazy material. And so what I did was I worked very, very hard on trying to make an illogical plot as logical as possible, which is, in a sense, is a definition of almost every great movie. I mean, if you look at Hitchcock films, they're all nuts. They make no sense, but the whole trick is to make them seem comprehensible and to make them seem logical in the world of Newtonian physics. So that was my job. So I worked very, very hard trying to plug up all the little holes that kept appearing in the plot as we wrote it. So I would go off, I would write, I would come back to Brian, we would go over it. He's a very smart guy. He's very analytical. And he would, we would sit there, and it was almost, it was very interesting for me. It was like a Talmudic session for me. I grew up learning Talmud, right? Which is, you study this incredibly difficult text, and you poke holes and ask questions, and it's, back and forth, trying to make sense of it and trying to come to some kind of coherent resolution. And that's what it was like writing this thriller. Brian and I would poke holes in the story, fill them up, and another place a hole would show up, and we would just, walk around, just try to make this thing work. And then finally, after we sort of exhausted the outline, he sent me off to write the screenplay, and I wrote several drafts, and then he was in production. And when he went off in production, then he did a rewrite all by himself, which I knew he would. I mean, that's just Brian. But he called me up and we went over certain things, and he said, well, what do you think of this idea? What do you think of that idea? And, so we sort of worked on the phone. I was living in Brooklyn at the time. And so I had nothing to do with the production.
How did the story change between that first time that you write that draft and then what we ended up seeing on screen?
The main change, as I remember, is that originally Brian was going to shoot it in New York. And the character who ends up being an Indian was a Rastafarian. But it's really, he changed it to Indian because it sort of it's just fit more in the West. So, but it was basically the same thing. It was actually, the truth is that, the script is pretty close to what you see up on the screen.
Yeah, I was reading the second draft of it last night, and even so much of the dialogue, everything seemed to be right there. The only real difference I saw was the murder of the woman was being done in a bathtub rather than with a drill.
Brian, again, a great director. And, when he gets on set and he looks at stuff and he thinks about him, he's going to go with his gut instinct and make it better, usually.
Well, that must have been kind of a thrill for you to be so invigorated when you saw the films of Hitchcock, and now you're working on this kind of mashup of Vertigo and Rear Window, and it's such an interesting way to put those two films together and actually make them work.
It goes along with Rich and Strange are my favorite Hitchcock movies, and also Young and Innocent. I really love The Young and Innocent. It was fun to do. Brian and I actually sat down and watched Vertigo together and Rear Window, which were hard to get hold of in those days. Remember, it was just video, and a lot of things were not on tape, and somehow Brian managed to get them. Really terrible copies. I remember the color was all off, but it was just wonderful to watch them. And we discussed them at length. I mean, we really talked about it a lot. I know critics well enough to know that we were going to get clobbered for it. On the one hand, I loved doing it. On the other hand, I sort of saw the handwriting on the wall with certain critics who would just take us to task for, ripping off Hitchcock, which we weren't doing. We were openly paying homage to just a great director, probably the most important director in the history of movies.
What was it like for you when you got to see the film projected for the first time?
It's a thrilling experience. You have to understand, I was raised in extremely modest conditions in a small apartment in Brooklyn. Nothing was expected of me except to, go into a normal profession, which I couldn't do because I was such a terrible student. And I had, wanted to do something else, and nobody really believed in me except the woman whom I married, who was a rabbi's daughter also we went to yeshiva together. I've known her since I was 9 years old. Actually been in love with her since I'm 9 years old. It was a thrilling experience because I had moved out to California studios. I got an agent very quickly and was offered many deals. And my wife and I moved out to California, and we paid our money and went to a theater and saw the film. And I had tears running down my eyes because it's the only thing I ever wanted was to be in the movies. I wanted my wife, so it was a wonderful experience, sitting with the woman I've loved since I'm 9 years old and seeing a movie. And the thing that I loved most in life, besides my wife, is the movies to this day.
What was the next thing that you managed to see in a theater of yours? Was it Dark Tower?
I've never seen Dark Tower. That's a film, again, that I was commissioned to write by some company. I don't remember who they were. They did my original script, I remember, was pretty good. And then it got rewritten by all sorts of people, and I didn't even want credit on it. And because I read a draft of it, and I thought it was just appalling, just awful. And so I've never seen the movie, so I really can't talk about it. But I was just not happy with the script that has my name on it. My name should not be on it. Nothing I can do about it. It's just one of those things where it's early in your career, and you just put it behind you.
Well, I do remember Stranger Among Us making quite a big splash when that came out.
That's where I really write about stuff that I know really, really well. Orthodox Jews, but I put it in Hollywood. I give a Hollywood spin to it. Right, so that was fun for me. I enjoyed working with Sidney Lumet, another really, really fine New York director.
The thing when it comes to speaking to writers that I always say is that, looking at your career on paper as far as what got greenlit and actually made it to the screen is one story, and then there are all of the projects that never made it there. Are there any regrets that you have with some of those?
Well, of course. I mean, I'm like any other screenwriter in Hollywood. I have a pile of scripts that I've written on spec that haven't gotten made for one reason or another, and it's painful. But that's the business. You get used to it. There's no use screaming about it and complaining. The truth is, look, I'm privileged to work in Hollywood. I've made a very good living over these years. I've raised children. I've got a house. And most of the people who come out to Hollywood fail. So I have some things that didn't get made. Maybe they will. Almost every project that I've worked on, except for Body Double, which is unusual, has taken years to get made. There's a film I wrote called The Devil's Arithmetic, which took me 7 years to set up. And the only reason it got made was because Dustin Hoffman read it and liked it and came aboard as executive producer. And then I won the Emmy for it. But that was a script that was just turned down by everybody in town, twice, 3 times. I mean, I submitted it everywhere, just never stopped. But that's how the business is. It's much easier for an executive to say no than to say yes. If he says no, he still has his parking spot, right? If he says yes and the film doesn't do well, he loses his parking spot, loses the lease on the BMW, and his contract doesn't get re-upped, and he's out there on his ass.
Yeah, I did read, I think this is one of yours, which In Hitler's Shadow from, I want to say it was around 90?
I think that was retitled The Infiltrator for HBO. I was, again, one of these weird projects where it came to me. I wrote original drafts, and then I was asked to do some stuff on the script that I didn't like at all, and I withdrew from the project, and another screenwriter came in and did a rewrite on me, which, again, that's the business. It's a pretty good film. It's okay. I'm not wild about it. The rewrite that I didn't want to do was done, and it did damage to the story that I knew it would. So that's why I kind of withdrew. And I'm not a particularly temperamental writer. I don't have a bad reputation, but there are lines that I just don't want to cross because you work too hard. And why, make myself crazy with a script that I'm unhappy with? You do the best you can. And at a certain point, you know that maybe it's best to start. And I think almost all good writers have that. There are very few writers who will write anything. I don't know many people like that. I assume they're out there.
What's your process? Do you write every single day?
I pretty much do. It's writing is like a muscle, and you have to exercise that muscle. And after about 30 years of doing this, I think I'm finally getting the hang of it.
What are you working on these days?
I'm writing a spec script about the Foreign Legion, big action adventure picture that takes place during 1863 in Mexico.
You've been in the business now for, almost 40 years, I think? My math is terrible. And you've seen so many changes in the business. Is it harder these days to get things made, or is it easier?
I'll tell you what you can't do is you can't sell a huge spec script for $1 million anymore, which I actually did during the 90s. I had a big spec script with Joel Silver, and Madonna was attached, and Demi Moore, and Joel Schumacher was going to direct, and I made a ton of money, and it never got made because you try working between Demi and Madonna and see where you end up. So those deals don't happen anymore. Where you have a spec script that's going to make you $1 million just for the option. And the business is not in the movies anymore. Nobody cares about the movies. People care about television. And rightfully so, because producers and stars control, and some directors, but basically producers and stars control the movies. And comic books are the subject matter of movies, big studio movies. Whereas writers control series television. And that's why series television is so excellent, and the stuff that people talk about and the stuff that people care about, a continuing story. Movies are a closed ecosystem. You watch a movie once, it's finished, it's gone. You watch a series, it is an open, it's the best of Charles Dickens. It's a story that can just keep going and going and going. You stand on the dock and you wait for the next boat to come in, and you yell, what happened to Little Dorrit, or what happened to this character or that character? And you hear the passengers who are coming over from England. They yell, "She died," or something. So it's an entirely different experience, and it's much more satisfying. So that's why people will binge on Netflix. They'll sit, or they'll go to HBO. They'll sit and they'll watch Game of Thrones. Starve themselves to death and watch for 8 weeks or something. Nobody does that with movies. So that's obviously that's the biggest change. If I were people who come to me for advice, I tell them ignore the movies and go straight to television, because that's where you control it as a writer. And that's where you're going to do your best work.
Do you mind if I ask, what was that project with Madonna and Demi Moore?
It was called Lita and Swan. It was a big cop movie. There was just a ton of development money poured into it. I did a couple of rewrites, and then because of internal politics and craziness and stars, mostly Demi, who was riding high in those days on the. Every week she was on the cover of Vanity Fair. She wanted to bring in her own writer, and she did, and he ruined the script. It just made a mash of it. And after all these people, Joel Silver and Warner Brothers, all spending like $10 million in development, it just ended up being a piece of junk, and they just dropped it. Which happens all the time. And then all they had to do is go back to the original script, and they would have had a beautiful movie that would have made endless amounts of money, just endless. But, that's the way Hollywood works. Can't complain. I made a lot of money. But it's a shame,
Robert, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a real pleasure talking with you.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoy your podcast. I tell my wife. My wife asks me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm listening to this podcast." And she says, "Isn't this a problem with a podcast is longer than the movie?"
We do have that problem quite often. Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, but I enjoy that. I'm still basically I'm still a little kid, sitting on the floor in Brooklyn and watching the $1 Million Movie for the first time, watching King Kong for the first time, and with my eyes wide and amazed by the movie.
How did you decide to become an actor?
Well, I started really liking movies, and my family was not a large television watchers, weren't allowed to watch much television, but, when I became sort of 14, 15, 16, I was like seeing a lot of movies on my own, I actually began a little earlier than that with my paper route money, I'd go and see movies, and so I liked that, and I kind of got into speech and oral interpretation in high school, and so I did very, very well at that, and I applied to a couple of small liberal arts colleges, and one of them gave me a scholarship because of the bunch of trophies that I won for the oral interp. And then I began acting in plays in college. And after I was there at Drury College for a year, I said, well, I got to go to a different place to get a bunch of training. And so that's how I then transferred and went up to Washington.
How long did it take you before you got the Rich Man, Poor Man gig?
I left Seattle the day after graduation. I came to Los Angeles, and I started the kind of thing of slipping the picture and the resume under agents' doors and that sort of stuff, but I had to get a job to live, so I began working in restaurants and tried to sort of scope out what's going on, because Los Angeles is a very large, amorphous kind of place, so you kind of look for your footing, and so I worked at that restaurant for about 6 months, and guy kept coming in, actually he was from Cleveland, not from Detroit, but David Johnson was his name. He's a great bass player, played with Roy Ayers and the OJs and stuff, and so we started talking music, and so then we formed a band for a while, and we did that for about 5 months as I lost every penny and was beginning to call the parents for money. So when the band folded, I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I've spent all this time trying to get the acting in school, so I got to get back to that. I think I sort of, got sidetracked a bit. Then I started selling over the phone to live, and I started finding various theaters around town to sort of spend time in, and I didn't do any productions then, but I began auditioning, and I auditioned for the Old Globe, went down to San Diego. I got an apprentice gig down there, and I got to understudy the leads of various plays, including Orlando and As You Like It, and then I went on about 4 or 5 times in that. Somebody then recommended me to Joel Thurm, who was a casting director, and he in turn knew that Pam Dixon was looking for somebody to play Nick Nolte's son. And so then I went from the Old Globe Theater doing Shakespeare up to doing Rich Man, Poor Man.
I don't know if people my age, I remember Rich Man, Poor Man, but I imagine people younger than me don't remember the importance of that and just what a big deal that was. And especially, the first one with Nick Nolte, the second one was equally, if memory serves, as popular. Just what a huge deal TV movies and miniseries were at that time.
Oh yeah, it was. No, I don't think people are aware of, and sort of this, they now call it extended form or long form or thing, but they have different names for it now. But the miniseries, I think there was just sort of QV7 and maybe one other one before Rich Man, Poor Man. Now, there were only about maybe 2 before Rich Man, Poor Man, so it was very much in the first bunch of those, and that was just gigantic. It was huge. Then when we did the series, that was a novel thing for Hollywood because they wanted Nick Nolte to come play his son, and they wanted, and I talked to Nick once. He's like, "Hey, you believe that? They want me to play my son? Are you fucking kidding me?" But they wanted Peter, they wanted all these cast members, and of course Peter was able to get the deal that he wanted. You could just sign your deal because it was a precedent-setting thing in that from that point forward, if you did a miniseries, you signed that series deal as well in case they wanted you the next time. It was a very big deal in ours, book 2, the series. We did 22, and that's all Peter was contracted for, and so that's why it stopped then. It was big, but it wasn't anywhere near as big as the miniseries.
You were in one that it took me forever to track down a copy of. I don't know if it's easier these days to find it, but back in the VHS days, it took me forever to get my hands on a copy of Mean Dog Blues.
Oh, Mean Dog Blues, yeah. That was, I'm trying to remember who, was that Crown International that made that? No, it was Bing Crosby Pictures, Bing Crosby Productions, I think, that made that movie. Yeah.
What a cast for that. That was crazy how many well-known faces there were in that film.
Oh, yeah. We had a great cast. George Kennedy, Kay Lange, Felton Parry, Gregory Sierra, Jim Wainwright. Yeah. A lot of good people. The movie didn't have a lot of press behind it or a lot of push behind it when it first came out, I think it was, sort of well reviewed, but it didn't have a lot of juice and money behind it to push it. So it was gone pretty quickly. It was probably why you couldn't find it.
Can you tell me about when you first met and started working with Brian De Palma?
Yeah, I first met Brian on Scarface. My agent said there's this one-line part in this movie. Are you interested in it? And I said, what? And they said, well, it's with Al Pacino, and you get to do it. I said, well, that could be interesting. It's with Brian De Palma. Well, that could be interesting. I said, well, what the heck, I'll go see it. So they set up a meeting with Marty Bregman. And so I went and I met Marty in his office, and he said, okay, do the line. So I, how do you do, Mr. Montana? That's the line. And he said, great, you got the job. Okay. And that was that. And it was one of the easiest jobs I've ever gotten. But and also the only time I've ever read with the producer only and got the job. So that's where I met Brian. And that part was, what was great about that was watching Al work, watching Brian work, watching John Alonzo work. It was the first large budget studio movie that I'd been on, and so that was kind of a trip. It was a very rainy season as we shot in Santa Barbara, which was doubling for Bogota. What was supposed to be 3 days' work ended up being like 2.5 weeks' work. So it was a pretty good job. But that's where I met Brian. So he probably, so my face kept coming up in his face in the editing room, I guess. But then when Body Double came along, I ended up getting an audition for that because of Howard Gottfried's secretary saw me in a play in downtown L.A. Jimsy was her name. And when they were looking for the part, Sam Bouchard, she said, oh, this guy would be great. At which point it was brought up to Brian, and he went, oh, well, yeah, I know who he is. Yeah, sure. And so then I went in and went through and had a meeting with Brian. I sort of read it with the casting director and Brian there, and then that began a long process of sort of callbacks that then went to a screen test, old-fashioned full crew screen test. I ended up getting the job.
The role of Sam Bouchard is pretty interesting since, really you're playing 3 characters in this film. And I'm curious, how did you approach who you were going to be as Sam Bouchard, who you were going to be as the Indian, who you're going to be as Ravel? Did you have a very distinct approach to each one of those?
Well, the Indian, of course, doesn't speak, so the Indian that was all just about the makeup and the physicality of it, to sort of present the most different kind of physicality I could. So there was a combination of, full chest prosthetic, neck prosthetic, teeth, hair, the whole thing, full 3.5-inch lifts on the boot, sort of trying to add some large man swagger to it. So that was basically that. And Sam Bouchard was sort of in one sense, he's a made-up persona, and is just sort of like he's just basically a con man. He's just basically trying to suck Craig's character, Jake, suck him in. It's created that on just sort of kind of a street hustle kind of thing, and a sort of an acting, a large town showbiz kind of hustle thing, because there's all kinds of people in L.A. that are always on the hustle. That's kind of what that was about. Now, I don't know what the other one is that you're talking about. It's been a long time.
Well, you were also the husband. It was very brief when you go in and you smack Deborah Shelton around.
Oh, yes. It's where I'm wearing the hat and I come up in a Lamborghini. Yeah, that's just basically a different sort of disguise, and so I really looked at it as that the guy I was playing as Sam Bouchard was the guy that was all of them, and he had created this ruse and this con, and then just played the characters in the play,
I'm not sure how Brian De Palma works. How do you go about actually getting into that character and finding that and working with Craig Wasson?
Well, Brian likes to rehearse, and he's old school in that way. For Body Double, we rehearsed for almost a full 2 weeks. I think, between 10 days and 2 weeks. Fully taped out floor, just like a stage play, of what the set pieces were going to be, where the sets were going to be, what we were doing. So there wasn't a scene, really, that we didn't touch on in that rehearsal, with the exception, I think, of really the grave of the grave. But it was all well rehearsed and well discussed, so that the objectives were clear, and we were all, very clear on what we were going to do. And Brian, in those rehearsal periods, he's a constantly meticulous observer, but he's he's very compassionate with his actors. He very much lets them roll and lets them, show him, and was never sort of dictatorial in the way some directors can kind of be, you know what I mean? Even though it is always his vision and his alone. I'm not saying that that's not true, but those rehearsals were great for me because I'm a theater animal. That's where I came from. So it all made me very comfortable. I was very appreciative for it. And it's true of the other movies we've done with him as well. Not as complete a rehearsal, not as full taped out floor and all that kind of stuff, but a couple of days of rehearsing and reading and stuff like that, which is more than you get for a lot of movies these days.
Had you ever done anything that heavy when it comes to the makeup at that point?
No, that was a first. Tom and Barry Dry Band, they were wonderful. It was a lot of makeup. It was going to be Rick Baker, so I went over and I did a full death mask with Rick Baker, and he had a whole design going, and then something fell out with scheduling on that, and so then Tom came in, so I went over and did another death mask with him, and we started a whole new makeup with him and Barry, his wife, I believe, and at the time, I can't remember when marriage happened, but at any rate, it was about 4.5 hours worth of makeup, because as I said, it was a full chest, stomach piece, full neck piece, full face, obviously, around the ears, full wig, full dentures, top, bottom. Those slip-on teeth. So, and then once you get all that on, then you got to paint it all, and so it's but it started out about 4.5 hours, and I think we might have got it down to maybe 3 hours and 45 minutes.
You really knocked it out of there, huh?
Trimmed a bit off of it, yeah. So, but you get those calls, when we're doing the big sort of chase on the beach and through the tunnel, I had like a 1:45 call in the morning for a 6 a.m. call on the set. That's what it was like.
And then you're in that all day long?
Yeah, then you're in that all day. Yeah, it was quite something.
Is that 100% you, or did you also have a stuntman who was made up to look like you?
No, that was all me. The only time it wasn't me was there was a shot of the Indian welding up on a tower. I don't know if you remember that shot, but kind of long distance. You don't come in on it. It's a long shot. And that's not me. But other than that, it was all me.
Did you have to work much with that dog or with those dogs? I imagine it was a team.
Yeah, I worked with quite a bit. No, it's really that one dog. It's really the one dog, a white dog, who was the dog from Sam Fuller's White Dog, actually, I think. I'm racking my brain to remember the animal trainer right now. Wonderful guy. I can't remember his name, but he was so good with him and very good with me and putting us together. He's smart as a whip, that dog. He was great. He had a lot of trouble trying to go through that glass in the car. That was very difficult for him, but he's a good pup.
When you started working on this film, was the ending already set?
I know what you're referring to. He did amend the ending after we were up and running. Can't remember what that change was about exactly, but that does strike a bell with me. Yeah, I think you're right. I remember changing was the actual sort of sequence that got us out of the grave, that got the dog in, that got the dog to do that whole ending kind of sequence there prior to the ending that takes us back to the present. That was a decision on Brian's part after we had started.
The things that we aren't seeing when you are putting the drill through Deborah Shelton, I imagine she's not there at all. What were you looking at that point?
No, Deborah wasn't there for that when that happens. And, of course, everybody swears that they see the drill go into the body, but you never do. So it was just a point for, they just gave me an X on the floor for where her face and eyes were, and then a spot for where we were going to drop the drill.
The movie opened to mixed reviews, let's say. It is definitely, garnered a larger reputation since then.
That's pretty kind.
I didn't want to be mean. But yeah, I mean. Yeah.
No, people didn't. No, people did not like it. Pauline Kael liked it. I'm not sure anybody else did. But then, of course, you get all these reviews as DVDs come out, as Blu-rays come out, and everybody, now everybody is like, oh, God, that was a great movie. And I was reading a couple of things today to sort of reacquaint myself before we spoke, and it's made it all a masterpiece, and a bunch of people that are reviewing it now from 2016 on. So, I don't know. It just takes time, I guess. Has to marinate.
I really wanted to ask you that whole sequence that takes place in the mall. How long did that take to shoot all that stuff? Do you remember?
I want to say we were there for 2-3 days, I think. Yeah, certainly 2 days. I don't know if we had a third or not, but there were certainly 2 days there. Yes, and that was very new, the Rodeo collection. I don't even think all the stores were rented out at that point in time. So, yet, it was all hyper glossy new spot. Yeah, I think 3 days. I don't know. It's a long time to remember the schedule, Mike. I don't know.
Did Body Double do anything for you as far as your career goes, at least at the time?
I got a parking space at Warner Brothers. It was great to be kicked upstairs to the big leagues of the major motion pictures, and so that was great. And so people sort of became aware of me in that world a little bit, which was good. But of course, I switched to playing a villain, which of course then puts you into a different understanding of everybody's mind. And so then there was the battle of, well, gee, can he play a good guy? And I was like, this is what I did for the first 4 years before this, so I don't know. Really, everything you do helps you in some way, and you never know who's going to go, what I loved was Body Double, and give you a job. You just don't know. I, of course, was very grateful for it, and, disappointed that it wasn't reviewed better and wasn't left in the theaters longer. It was just not received well. There was also a lot of problems at Columbia at that time. I think Guy McElwain had just taken over, and I don't know whether the Bagelman scandal was then or still, they were still dealing with that or something. I don't know. There was something different at Columbia as well. And so I think it was what it really was the Bagelman thing was earlier, but the changing of the guard from, I think it was maybe Price to McElwain, as that always happens, it's like, well, who picked which movie? And if the outgoing administration picked that movie, the incoming administration is not going to sell that movie, We suffered a little bit from that, but basically the reviews were brutal.
What was your role like in Casualties of War?
Did you see Paltrow and Birnbaum's De Palma, the documentary? So we went to see that for fun, and it was fun to watch that. And it was also fun to see that because I saw a scene of mine from Casualties of War. And of course, when my wife and I went to movie theaters to see Casualties of War, I wasn't in it and was cut out entirely. And it was one of those situations where Brian didn't let me know. And it's always like, ooh, God, that smarts a little bit. That stinks. But it was great to sort of hear in that documentary kind of what happened with that. And when it got to the court-martial scenes, which is where my scenes were, they didn't want this re-prosecution, this new attack on Michael Fox's character. I understood that. It was a fun surprise to see the lost Greg Henry footage from Casualties of War in that documentary. Yeah, it was fun.
As you're doing all of this work, because you've been in so many things over the years, what's your relationship like with music? Are you going back and continuing to play in a band, or how does that go?
Well, yeah, no, I always continue to do music. I always continue to write songs, and I really sort of recommitted myself to songwriting, I guess, in kind of the late 90s. Had a pretty good hit with Dwight Yoakam called "The Back of Your Hand," which the video for that was number one on country music television for about 5 weeks, I think, and it's been on country music television's greatest hits and Dwight's greatest hits, and a number of other greatest hits collections. So that's all kind of fun for me. And so I've continued to write songs, and, I've played some songs that I've either played or sang or for other people in some various things. I've been writing musicals. I wrote a musical called Little Egypt, the musical, which we did here in Los Angeles, and then also took back to New York, which I did music and lyrics for. Lynn Seipert wrote the book. And then I've just written another one that I developed with the Labyrinth Theater, so I'm kind of a masochist in this area with the writing musicals, but it keeps me off the streets. I like it. And I play out from time to time here, when I have new songs, I play out at various clubs in L.A.
I asked you about the makeup being the Indian character before, and I'm curious, I know that you were full makeup when it came to Star Trek Insurrection. Had you done anything even remotely like that in between those roles?
Well, those were the big makeup roles.
Those are pretty big. I mean, how long did it take for the makeup for Insurrection?
Yeah, Insurrection was a long one, too. And although that one started out at about 3:45, and we got that down to about 2:45 over time. So was there another one in between? I don't think so. I think the others were since then. I did a huge makeup for Slither, and I did a huge makeup for an episode of Star Trek. One of those Star Treks. I don't know which iteration it is. I forgot.
Enterprise, I think it was.
Enterprise, yeah. And that was a full lizard guy, and that one took about 3 hours as well. So I do know the feeling of cold glue on your face at 3 a.m.
One of my favorite roles of yours, where it just seems like you are having a lot of fun, and please don't shatter the illusion if you weren't, but when you are Val Resnick in Payback, it just looked like you were having such a great time being such a bad guy.
I had a great time. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. I thought the role was a lot of fun, and Brian was great in that he really sort of went for the ride with my interpretation of what the part was, because when I was auditioning for that, which was a very long process, initially he was loving it because he was laughing, and he said, I just didn't know it was this funny, and I said, it is to me. So he, after a couple more callbacks, he was really going with that, and then of course Lucy needed to be cast, so we were going through so I said I'd read with her for those auditions, and but I still wasn't cast even when I read Lucy. It took another 3 months before Mel saw the audition tape. Then once he did, then we were golden. Then we were going. But I had a wonderful time. Yeah, it was a great time. Mel was tremendously fun to play with, as of course Lucy was. We had a great time, and shot in Chicago. It was Indian summer in Chicago. Beautiful fall, warm fall weather for 5 weeks there, and then we were back at Warner Brothers for 5 weeks.
More recently, you have become almost like a rabbit's foot for James Gunn. You've been in almost everything that he's done recently.
Yeah, well, I think we got the record that I've still been in everything he's done. Although the last Guardians of the Galaxy, it was extremely brief, but it was long enough to actually recognize me, which means about that long. Yeah, James, I think, is a brilliant filmmaker and a beautiful guy. Got a really piece of bad luck from these evil trolls, and then Disney brass deciding that they would let evil trolls organize and plan a business. But James was much more open about it and all, and said he understood and everything, and and he's got some other great things lined up. I think he's doing Suicide Squad, and possibly I know he wrote it, but he might even be directing that. So, I did Slither and Super and both Guardians, and then I did his small series about the the raccoon. What was that called? He has a great love of raccoons. I don't know if you Sparky and Michaela. That was the one we did, which was hilarious. We shot it at his house with just puppet raccoons on skateboards, and it was a lot of fun.
So what are you up to now? Are you still working on Black Lightning?
No. They killed me dead on Black Lightning.
Spoilers, jeez.
Well, that people regenerate and come back to life, so you just never know. But that was a lot of fun doing that show. But I shot a movie this summer in Winnipeg that was called Strike when we shot it. It is now going to be called Stand, and is a musical, and it's based on the general labor strike of 1919, which was a very big thing around the world, really. But in Winnipeg, it was particularly huge. There was this guy, Danny Shore, wrote this musical as a stage play, which has played every year in Winnipeg for about 8 years, something like that. And then he finally put together a screenplay, got together the money. We shot this movie up there in September. And I just did some ADR on it last week, and it's looking pretty good. And their hope is to take it to Cannes, because the worldwide labor strike will have its 100th anniversary in June of 1919. There's a lot of interest from labor groups and from countries that still respect labor unions. So they're interested to get over to Europe with it, and hopefully Cannes will say, sure, come on over.
Was this your first proper musical where you're singing on screen?
On screen, yep. I've sung my own songs on screen, but this is the first time to be in a musical, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Finally marrying those passions together, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it was fun. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been a real pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you, Mike. I hope you got some things that are of interest to you and are usable, as they say.
ज़ीरो बन गया हीरो हो गया चमत्कार यारों मैं बन गया फिल्म स्टार देखो मेरे यारों मैं बन गया फिल्म स्टार मिस्टर ज़ीरो बन गया हीरो मिस्टर ज़ीरो बन गया हीरो हो गया चमत्कार यारों मैं बन गया फिल्म स्टार देखो मेरे यारों मैं बन गया फिल्म स्टार.
All right, we're back and we're talking about Body Double. You have to know that your movie is successful in some ways if there is a almost beat for beat, shot for shot Bollywood remake of it. And Body Double definitely qualifies for that. There is a film called Pela Nasha, which translates roughly to first intoxication, as in like first love. And it was directed by, I'm going to butcher the name, Ashutosh Gowariker, who also directed the Oscar-nominated Lagan film, which is available on Netflix right now, just in case people want to see that. It plays a lot, of course, with movie-making tropes. It starts off with the scene that is this really over-the-top kind of a scene of violence and this guy saving all these people who live in this apartment complex, it seems like. And I'm saying seems like because there's no subtitles that I've been able to find this. But you really don't necessarily need the subtitles because, like I said, once we get out of that, we see this movie. We think it's the real thing, but then we end up knowing that it's a movie. We go to the premiere of this movie. Everyone's happy. Everybody's, clapping. And our main character is, whose name is Deepak is, getting slapped on the back and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden the fire alarm goes off in the building. No, it's not the fire alarm. It's his alarm clock. He's just a struggling actor and he's going through the exact same things that Jake Scully went through. So the biggest difference for me is that there are different moral codes when it comes to Indian films versus the U.S. film. And there's no nudity allowed in this Bollywood movie at this point. I don't know if if nudity's allowed now, but it's basically this woman dancing across the way, and that really does something for our main character, and she ends up just being a dancer at a club that he happens to walk into. There's no LA After Midnight kind of a show, and she gives this performance that then reminds him of this performance across the way. But yeah, and the thing that kept getting me, and one of the reasons why I kept saying the Indian throughout this entire movie, when we're talking about Body Double, is because the Indian in this film is played by an Indian.
Not only can they not show nudity and there's no gory drill murders, but I don't think they're allowed to kiss on screen either. So you have a lot of hugging in this film, which is different for an erotic thriller. And I was really upset that there wasn't a 360-degree angle of a hug, like a camera shot like in Vertigo. But, it is odd to see what could be a PG take at best of this story. It's got a lot more dream sequences, has a lot more musical numbers than I was. I kind of was expecting some, but none as good as the Relax.
I was absolutely fine with all of the musical numbers in here, and I kind of actually liked the one of the first ones, Mr. Zero something or other. But of all the musical sequences, the only one that I ended up fast forwarding was the one in the club with all the guys who look like they're dressed as Arabic guys who have like the chic head thing going on. That one goes on for way too fucking long, and I just couldn't stand it. After a while, it's just like, no, of all the musical sequences, this is the one that broke the camel's back. I have to fast forward through this.
Yeah, it is a little excessive. I was surprised when he called the Gloria character, and then they broke into a musical number singing to one another, which was not a twist I did not see coming, even if it was revealed to be a fantasy sequence. But I thought it was interesting that it's dealing with movie culture in a sense, but it's not satirizing those worlds the way De Palma does. Like, it's not dealing with schlock, horror, or porn. Like, it's dealing with what feels like the big budget kind of movies that would constitute success, like a personal breakthrough for the actor hero. I can't remember if the director, I thought I read that he was a movie star before becoming a filmmaker, and which might be why he had so many big name Bollywood stars in his debut feature, even though the film, from what I understand, was not a success commercially.
I was happy when there were like little nods to the film Dawn. And yeah, we do ultimately have a success. We kind of replay that success of him in the opening night is revisited at the end of the film. And it's basically, it almost reminds me of like North by Northwest when they're on the Lincoln Memorial and he's like, here, give me your hand. And he pulls her up and he's actually pulling her up into the bed in the train and the train goes in the tunnel. It's like, okay, yeah, now we are in the movie version of the end of the film. The one thing that I found interesting too was that they don't have a guy in makeup, that they actually have two different actors playing the Sam Bouchard role. And because when I saw the guy who was Sam Bouchard and then I saw the guy who was quote unquote the Indian, I was just like, wow, they look really different. That's a fantastic makeup job.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how that makeup was being achieved because he looked so different from the other actor. I'm like, oh, it's actually just a different guy. It's funny you mentioned North by Northwest because for me, the most interesting variation on De Palma's film was the tunnel that he chases the Indian, standing character in this version is a train track tunnel. And so I was reminded of North by Northwest as well as Body Double, with the train tunnel. It follows certain sequences so closely like that I don't know if I wonder if De Palma has seen it because he's never commented on it.
Yeah. But yeah, it is so close. And I'm really hoping I was talking to, the guy that does the, Deja Vu series on YouTube, who I just talked about recently when we were talking about another film that had a different remake, another country remake. And, he really needs to cover this one because it is so similar, but yet so different at the same time. And those weird moments of comedy, like when there's crazy glue that gets introduced and he grabs the Holly Body character's arm, and I was just like, did he just grab her arm with crazy glue? And then there's a whole song that takes place as they're bonded together with this crazy glue. Yeah, exactly. It's like, now we are in love, and now, or her two bodyguards that beat the shit out of him, and then he's in the hospital and he's trying to talk to her, and there's miscommunication that's going on. So for an erotic thriller, this movie has a lot of comedy in it.
Yeah, when he tries to explain the Holly Body dance, to the police chief by acting it out in the police station, I thought, it felt like a Roberto Benigni comedy or something. It just felt like a totally different kind of filmmaking.
Yeah, that was pretty painful. I was very surprised when I read that De Palma was nominated for a Golden Raspberry for Body Double because of all the things that I can say about Body Double. The direction in that movie was really fucking good. And so I don't know, what Harold P. Raspberry, what his qualifications were as far as like why this movie was considered, why De Palma was considered to be one of the worst directors of the year. But I guess it was just part of that backlash against this film because Body Double in its day was not a very well-liked film.
We mentioned Blue Velvet earlier. This movie actually made more money as a flop than Blue Velvet did as a sleeper hit. Like it didn't it didn't make a lot of money, but it didn't, I think it cost 10 million and made 8 or something like that. It wasn't like a fiasco the way Blowout was or the way that, Bonfire of the Vanities or something was. But, it has to just be the, I don't know, maybe they thought cause who votes on that? Is that all industry people that vote on the Golden Raspberries?
I don't know who that is. It feels like, I know the Golden Turkeys and the Medveds, but it feels like something that, a couple of jokers like the Medved brothers would just get into a dark closet and touch each other and throw out titles of stuff. I mean, I was just looking at the winners for the 2018 Golden Raspberries, and it's just like Holmes and Watson basically swept everything. I was like, wow, that's really kind of easy, guys. And then it was like Holmes and Watson for so many of the categories, and then it was Donald Trump for so many of the categories, and then it was Melissa McCarthy for Happy Time Murders. And I was just like, wow, that's some real hard-hitting acerbic satire that you guys are doing there.
Yeah, I don't know if it was just a backlash because of the porn connections or the constant fighting over the X ratings, or I don't know if they were just trying to send a message that kind of renegade behavior in the 80s Hollywood was not going to be tolerated. I don't know, because it's not really a great era for mavericks in the studio system. And this was like the last film he made that really pushed those kind of buttons for a while.
Which is so funny too, because then Blue Velvet would go on to get the Best Director nomination for the Academy Awards.
Though it definitely not get a positive review from Roger Ebert.
But it got a great review from De Palma's old champion, Pauline Kael. So
De Palma could go up on screen, take a shit, and Pauline Kael would have given him 1,000 words of how great it was.
Although Pauline Kael did not like Body Double nearly as much as his previous stuff, I think.
Yeah. She didn't like Craig Wasson either.
So speaking of Wasson, I feel like I can't let this episode go without mentioning this. Now, I don't know as far as like the validity and, all this kind of stuff, because I don't know who the person was that wrote this blog post from April of 2007. Now, I find it interesting that Wasson's last credited screen role was 2006. And then April 2007, there was a blog called Bitchy Actress. So bitchyactress.blogspot.com. And she hasn't written for a few years. There's no way to get a hold of her because I would have liked to have talked to her about this. She wrote a story on her blog, and I don't know if it's her or a story about her or a story about a friend, because it's a little confusing as far as that goes. Maybe you guys can correct me, but there's a story that she tells about being a teenager and hanging out with Craig Wasson and him pretty much being very handsy with this teenage girl. And in 2019, reading that story, and I had read that years before when I was trying to get a hold of Craig Wasson, made me really uncomfortable, in this kind of, okay, this guy should have been outed as being kind of a sexual predator. And it kind of sounds like he was. He's still working. He still does a ton of stuff as far as audiobooks. Like I mentioned on the LA Confidential episode a few months ago, he does the narration for the LA Confidential audiobook that's on Audible. That's pretty much his stock and trade now, is doing audiobook readings. He does a great job of it, but I don't know if there was a correlation between this story on this blog and his screen career kind of ending, or if it was just coincidental.
It definitely does not look good for him if this is what happened. It definitely is a very creepy anecdote that is shared on the blog. I know that our mutual friend Amanda Reyes had known him, years ago, and said that he was nice enough and wasn't creepy with her, but that he maybe seemed a little troubled at that stage. This was years ago, but I think he's since found religion, which makes him very much unlike Bill Maher.
No confusing the two as far as that goes. All right, we're going to take another break and play a preview for next week's show.
In 18th century France, Jean-Baptiste Grenouille was born with a talent that made him unique among mankind.
Stones, warm stones, water, frog.
His phenomenal sense of smell was a gift that had been given to him, and him alone.
Master, can I come to work for you? My nose knows all the smells in the world.
No man can call himself a perfumer unless he has proved his worth.
The soul of beings is their scent.
The intoxicating power of the girl's smell made it clear to him that he must learn how to preserve scent, so that never again would he lose such sublime beauty.
Creating the perfume.
Each perfume contains 3 chords, 12 notes in all.
There's a murderer out there!
One can only create a truly original perfume by adding one essence that will bring out.
Whatever his insane scheme, it will surely be incomplete without you.
A perfume of such power that every person on earth believed they were in paradise.
That's why we'll be back next week with a look at Tom Tykwer's Perfume. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-host, Jim and Bill. So, Bill, what is the latest with you, sir?
Well, I've been taking a little bit of a break from my show supporting characters. I am preparing new episodes, but I'm not sure when I'll start putting them out again. But you can find the old episodes over at www.nowplayingnetwork.net. I think since last time I talked to you, I've had Peter Biskin, Stephen Thrower, Rachel Nisbet, Manuela Lasich, Sergio Mims, Adrienne Martin, Eric Allen Hatch, a bunch of people. I talked to different people that write about film or do film programming, DVD extras and such. So you can find that show, the old episodes there. Otherwise, I did a few essays for an upcoming book on 1980s cult movies that is going to be edited by Kat Ellinger. I'm not sure when that's coming out. And then I'm working on some home video related stuff that hasn't been announced yet. So I can't say anything more than that.
And Jim, what's happening in your world?
So my latest short film, Library Hours, is kind of at the tail end of its festival run. So it was on the circuit for over a year, and now I'm developing a feature film, which is a very non-De Palma murder mystery. Sort of takes place in two different timelines. It's 1979 and 1999 as well. And so I'm kind of just heads down on that, writing that, hoping to get that shooting later this year. My previous stuff can be seen on my website, which is www.jimvendiola.com. And then if anybody wants to keep track of my stuff beyond the website, all the social media links are accessible from there.
Thank you so much, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Please head on over to the website, projection-booth.com, where you can find out more about today's episode. You'll also find links over to iTunes, where you can rate and review the show, and to Patreon, where you can make a donation to the show. Donors get early access to every episode as long as I'm not running late. Every donation and every rating we get helps the Projection Booth take over the world.
But shoot in the right direction. Making it, going down, son. Live those dreams, scheme those schemes. Gotta hit me with your laser beam.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.